I was the first police officer in this country to get indicted, convicted, and sent to prison on line of duty shooting. I did nothing wrong because we stupidly sat silent for 34 years. Yeah, my name is Kent McGowan. I was a law enforcement officer in Texas, working with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. I was involved in a line of duty self-defense shooting set up by some very corrupt lawmen over a personal vendetta. And I was sent to prison for 20 years for something I didn't do. And now after 34 years of sitting quiet, we have a book come out, and I'm doing these podcasts to get my story out there, to know if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody out there. And I'm also here just to set the record straight that all the tabloid trash, sensationalistic documentaries, books out there are just a bunch of lies. They're here to get the actual story out, to get the truth out, and expose who's responsible and hold them accountable for this. Yeah, I went to Houston Police Academy, graduated in May of 85, went out on patrol, did my field training program. I left when I was resigning. There was a lot of controversy that went on at HPD in the tabloid trash about my case. None of that happened. It's all been disproven. There's no documentation of any of the allegations that were made. And I never had anything against me. It was just some crazy stuff going on.
What do you mean in the police department when you left?
Yeah, when I left, I was married and it was wrong. It still is, but didn't want to date any female police officers. That was a problem. And we all avoided that. And I got involved in this one. It was stupid. We're at a police-owned and operated bar. It stayed open after hours. And, I wound up having a little 3-week fling with this girl. And she was insane. And she caused a lot of problems. She wound up getting fired. They pulled her commission and made her be just a civilian employee for a year, go to weekly psychiatric issues. She pulled the same stuff. Broke into my house, my apartment I had in town with a civilian roommate, took him hostage, and tried to shoot herself, tried to shoot me. And needless to say, that didn't last long, that relationship, until our commander got wind of it, put a halt to all that nonsense. But when I left to pursue college, actually, my intention was to read a law degree. And since Houston did not have a leave of absence program, I had to resign. I was just planning on going back. Mm-hmm. But the Sheriff's Department had a reserve division there, the Sheriff's Department in Harris County, in which Houston is encompassed. And I took a commission. I applied for a reserve position, and the detective who's doing my background investigation used to work for my brother at a different agency. And he called and he said, "Hey, why don't you want a full-time position, man?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to school." And he goes, "Hey, look, we're hiring some instructors. You have the experience and the certification and whatnot." I was like, "Man," my wife's like, "Don't do it. You're going to get sucked right back into it." So what? I went to work there. Hired on as an instructor. I was an instructor about 16, 18 months. I got pulled out to go on street patrol in Northwest Harris County, which is the nicest part. Now it's just a complete nightmare. It's just gone to rapper for sure. But I got sent out there to District 1, Northwest Harris County. First day in there, I walked in and met Sergeant David Ruggiero. This guy starts jumping my ass right when I walked in. And I was like, "Man, hang on, dude, So I said, went in his office. I said, "What's your beef with me, brother?" He said, "Man, I heard this." And I said, "You don't know jack shit about me, man. Let me tell you, I don't know you. You don't know me,
What did he say he heard?
He called me out, "You do things below board, and, you ain't pulling shit out here." Because at the time, there was a bureau commander, a major, and he, I think a lieutenant, 4 sergeants, me, we owned a nightclub and some other stuff out in that area. And he got wind of this, pissed him off. But this sergeant, he had no business being a police officer, let alone a supervisor. An utter coward. I mean, the stories I could tell about that guy was ridiculous. But if something happened out in that beat, or that district, he was married, but he had a girlfriend that owned a big nightclub, and it was like 15 miles out of my beat. Whenever something happened, he'd always tell me to go run it. Mm-hmm. We had a couple of capital murders, whatever. He always want me to go there because he knew my training experience at Houston PD. Where Houston, I ran more calls in a week than the county did. A deputy in the county probably did in a year. It was crazy. But out in that area, we're totally unmanned. Our manpower was below anything you could possibly think of. As many people as we had out there. So we had very few deputies working. Vehicles, we're light years behind Houston PD. We had no computers, nothing. It was all still manual, writing reports by hand, stuff like that. But Sergeant called me in. He starts getting on my ass. I said, "Hey, man, fuck this." I shut the door. I said, "Let me tell you something, man. This is no stripes and no badge. What's your problem with me?" "Well, I heard this." I said, "I don't give a shit what you heard, man. You're going to talk to me in front of these deputies like this." And so, of course, I go back out there and he and I didn't. Nobody on that whole division liked that guy. Couldn't stand that dude, man. The way he was, and being a coward. But there's several scenes that I made where he told me to go to, where he was there. It was just shocking what he did. I was there on patrol. I got there on April 3rd of 1992. It was my first day out on my patrol. And I was out there maybe a month or so. I pulled over Michael Schaefer, who wanted to be my confidential informant. And this beat I had 3 really nice neighborhoods in it, upper bourgeois. And he's running this whole ratty ass little station wagon and rolled through. It's like 2 a.m. I was working night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And Schaefer runs the stop sign right in front of me. Of course, I'll pull him over. Mm-hmm. And he was driving, and a guy in the passenger seat who we found out later with Keith Skura plays a big part in this, and a girl in the back who was Michael Schaefer's girlfriend. I pull him over. They had a little bit of in the car. No citations issued, contrary to the tabloid trash books and documentaries. If there had been a citation, there would have been a record of it. Mm-hmm. I issued them tickets. I asked him who owned the weed. He's like, man, I didn't. And so I said, hey, don't let me catch out of this stuff anymore, brother. And so I cut him loose. A few weeks later, I pull him over again, same traffic stop. And he starts talking to me. He goes, hey, this thing like these automatic weapons out here? And I said, yeah. Because we did have a lot of automatic weapons showing up on drive-by shootings, shooting up houses and whatnot. And so he blurts out the story to me. He said, hey, I'm involved in this burglary ring. And these real gangbangers out of Houston were coming up. And this is in 1992. And those little like Chevy Loves, little small pickup truck lowriders were in the thing. And they're basically these rich white kids, except for this guy, this little hanger on, wound up being my informant. But these real gangbangers are coming up recruiting them to burglarize these houses. And then the real gangbangers out of Houston wanted the weapons, and they're converting them to full auto AR-15s and Mini 14s and whatnot. Converting them to full auto and putting them back on the street, and that's what's showing up.
These are weapons that are being taken out during burglaries.
Right. Okay. Yeah, these guys are ripping them off, going into houses and targeting, and whatever booty they took on top of that, they kept and sold or whatnot. But they, so he runs this whole story to me, right? So I had a lieutenant, Jay Coons, great lieutenant, Marine. This guy was a policeman's policeman. And I went to my lieutenant and skipped over to Sergeant Ruggiero because I didn't trust this guy at all. He was utterly incompetent. Mm. Lieutenant Coons was not. He was just the opposite. This guy was a fantastic commander. So I ran it by what the informant told me, and he said, well, work a deal with him. All right. But on the scene with that informant, I'd given him, we had beepers back then.
Yeah.
I gave him a beeper number, and I wrote back my card. And a couple of weeks later, he called me, and he said that he called me on my beeper. I called him back, and he said they'd hit a house, burglarized a house. And one of the guys involved in that run had a stolen pistol. Did I want to buy it? And I said, yeah. I called Lieutenant Coons. He said, yeah. So I came in that night and worked plain clothes. And I got a wrecker. I was plain clothes, driving a wrecker. And I went and sat in the parking lot where we were going to do the buy bust on the stolen handgun.
Right.
So my informant, he's sitting in his car. And then another vehicle pulls up, a red Mustang. And then a Camaro or something, 2 girls.
Before you go any further, why is he acting as an informant?
That's a very good question. When he first started telling me all this about because I was very suspect.
Because not like you had arrested him or anything.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's a big part in this. And I've been asked that numerous times, and I wanted that at the time too. Because most people who snitch, they do it to get rid of competition.
Yeah, or to get out of
payback, to get out of something
right.
that matter. But which leads into why he did it. Leads into it. But I ran it by Coons. He said, let's do the deal. So I get the informant $200 and then to buy the gun.
Okay.
And so I'm in the parking lot. I see a red Mustang pull up, and it was driven by Jason Aguilar and another guy in it who was actually the Keith Skura, the guy who was in the vehicle I stopped a few weeks earlier. That guy lied about his identification. To this day, we've never seen this guy. The DA's office hid him all these years. But I see him get out. Michael Schaefer, my informant, gets out, and I see him go to Jason Aguilar, who has a stolen revolver. It's a Smith & Wesson 357, and they exchange cash for the weapon. So I get the buy bust. Whole team goes in. We take everybody down, including, you always take down the informant. There's 2 teenage girls that were there. They're all screaming, we don't even know these guys, man. We just met them down the street at a club. And So I got those girls, and I said, hey, man, you need to get out of here. You need to pick up. These guys will get you in trouble hanging out with these.
When you're working all day, it's easy to reach for an energy drink just to get through the day. There are times I drink 2 or 3 of them during a podcast just to make it through, and then I'd crash. That's why I decided to try Ultra Pouches. I've been using them recently, and they've been a nice change. They're 0 nicotine and 0 caffeine, but they still help me stay focused when I'm working long hours. Ultra uses plant powder ingredients to give you smooth, steady focus without making you feel wired. I like keeping a patch by my desk at all times. When I feel low energy or unfocused, I like to pop one in my mouth, and I'm locked in without the crash. My favorite is Blue Raz. It's sweet with a little tartness, kind of like a blue raspberry candy. If you're looking for a cleaner way to stay focused all day, give Ultra Pouches a try. Ultra is the ultimate guilt-free pouch, delivering instant focus and mental clarity with 0 nicotine and 0 caffeine. New customers can get 15% off with code COX at takeultra.com. That's TakeUltra, code COX for 15% off. Let them know Inside True Crime sent you.
Well, these girls take off, and they go down to a steak restaurant. And they get the mother of Jason Aguilar, the guy who sold us the pistol. They get his mother, who I wound up shooting 48 hours later over this. These 2 teenage girls go get the mother, Susan White. I just call her the suspect. That's all she ever was to me, as a felony suspect. She was married at the time, and she was with Ray Valentine, her boyfriend, who was also married at the time. Of course, they weren't married to each other. But they come down there, and it's Ray Valentine looked like something off a Joe Pesci movie. Big old heavy set guy, jet black hair, comb back, the gold Italian love horn, and a black silk suit with a red silk shirt with a big collar on it. And I see him pull up. I'm wearing plain clothes. I see him pull up and getting out. And I said, looked over my partner, Scott Genovese. And I said, man, they're somebody's pissed off parents.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Susan White, the suspect, she walks over to 4 other deputies, calling them McGowan. And one of them was Tommy Welch. I was 27. I was 5'11", 185. Tommy Welch like 64, probably 350, well over 6 foot tall. He goes, I'm not McGowan. That's McGowan. She goes up to Chris Gush, tall, skinny, redheaded, green-eyed deputy. We look nothing like. She did so 4 other deputies.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, he said, that's McGowan over there. And I was kneeled down near the open back door of the patrol car where her son, Jason Aguilar, was in there. I was getting information to tow his car, his red Mustang, which had bullet holes in it from the drive-by shootings they've been involved in, stolen purses, credit cards, debit cards, whatnot. But she walks over, and Scott Genovese looked nothing like me. She starts hollering at him, calling him McGowan. So obviously 48 hours, she didn't know me prior to shooting. And I said, and I stand up, I said, I'm McGowan. She goes, that's my son. This is a fucking setup. He would never get involved in something like this. And she was clearly intoxicated, if not on other things. So I looked at her and said, hey, you need to get your ass out of here or you're going to jail. And her boyfriend, he knew not to mess with us.
Right.
His organized crime activities. So he grabs her and puts her back in his Lincoln Town car. Well, a couple minutes later, she bailed out with they had the first cell phones, big brick ones with a black antenna. This is on a Saturday night, like 1:30 in the morning, Saturday night, early Sunday morning, right? She comes right there and she has Captain C.J. Harper on the phone, who was a captain where I worked, but I'm not in his chain. He's not my chain of command.
Right.
She's calling this, and he was married. And she comes over, well, I got Captain Harper on the phone. He wants to talk to you. I said, well, fuck, who you had on the phone, man? I said, he's not my chain of command. He can call me. He has my beeper number. He can call me tomorrow. I'll get a rundown. You need to get off the scene. And so Ray Valentine, the boyfriend, grabs her again, puts her back in a town car, and they're trying to burn out. And I'll never forget this like it happened yesterday. He's driving, and she's on the passenger side. She leans out the window, looks at me, and she said, I'm going to get you, you son of a bitch. Screamed that at me. And she did. She did. She got me, my family, destroyed all of us. Well, they take off. So yeah, we hook and book everybody, take them down to the substation. And I told that suspect, I said, hey, he'll call you about 4 or 5 hours from the station. You need to go home, you know. And so we go to the substation, we book him in and whatnot. And I'm doing the paperwork, and Lieutenant Coons is sitting at his table across from me like this. Well, the phone rings, and he picks up the phone. He said, all right, well, yeah, I'll take care of it. Hangs up. I'm not paying attention. You're not a real good rapport with him. Great guy. And then a phone rings again about 10 minutes later. And somebody's hollering the phone. He's looking at me going, making goofy faces. He hangs up again. I said, who the hell is that? And he goes, that was that crazy ass woman from the scene. I said, what is she saying? And he said, oh, she's saying that you were down there, ask her if she was divorced yet, telling her she had nice legs and all this. Well, all these deputies were there. And this is in the parking lot of a nightclub. Record drivers. That was never said.
Right.
If that was said, that would have been brought up in court somewhere, throughout the situation. But I just blow it off. I think nothing of it. Still doing paperwork. About an hour later, we all hear screaming, a female screaming in the hallway. Like by now, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning. And Lieutenant Coons, Chris Gush, Scott Genovese, these other deputies, they go out there and I hear them hollering, They come out and I said, what the hell is that? Lieutenant Coons said, it was that crazy ass woman, man. If we would have arrested her for PI, this probably wouldn't have happened.
I was just going to say, why hasn't somebody just arrested her and put her in a drunk tank?
I mean, I don't know. That's the sheriff's department. When I went out there on patrol in the sheriff's department, I was told, hey, this is not Houston PD. At the sheriff's department, you're from elected officials. I said, what do you mean by that? They said, well, certain people out here go to jail and certain people don't. And I said, I thoroughly agree. You're not a criminal, you don't go to jail. You're a bad guy, you go to jail.
Right.
And that caused me some issues out there. Because I didn't go by that nonsense. After she leaves that morning, I worked night shift 10 to 6. So I'm home. It's like 4 in the afternoon. My beeper's going off. We didn't have cell phones. My beeper's going off, and it was an uncommon number, but it was 911 behind it. And whenever we had informants with our beepers, like I'd issue like 571 or whatever. So if I got a call and said like 571, I know it was you.
Yeah.
But it was his number, the 911. So I'm like, I live about an hour and a half from Houston, and I called him and he said, hey, man, that Jason Aguilar's mom's calling, making threats. She already tried to pull a gun on me, tried to shoot me. She's making threats to have me killed. I said, where are you now? He goes, I'm in my brother's house. And I said, and he was 19, but he had the mind of a 9-year-old.
Right.
And I said, you safe at your brother's house? He said, yeah. I said, hey, man, you stay there. I'll come in early tonight. I said, you're going to be at this number about 8 o'clock. He said, yes, all right. So I went into work early that night and I called him. I said, what the hell's going on, man? And he said, Susan White, the suspect, he said, man, she's calling my family in Austin and Clean, and she's, saying she knows I'm a snitch, and snitches in Houston don't live long. Don't you watch TV? Informants get killed, all this. I'm like, are you shitting me, man? I said, all right. So I call the district attorney's office, and they have DAs on duty 24/7. No matter what time of day or night. You call and say, hey, I caught this guy in the house. Is it good? Take burglary charges? Yeah. You get the DA's name.
How do I proceed? Yeah.
Yeah. And the prosecutor say put my name on whatever, accepting charges. So I call and talk to Gene Sprouting Hughes. He was assistant DA at the time. She said, hey, I'll take charges on felony retaliation. She said, but you need to call the informant, Michael Schaefer's mother in Austin, because that's who actually talked to Susan White, the suspect.
Right.
So I called that dude back and I said, hey, what's your mother's number? And he goes, I don't know. I said, where does she live? Well, in Austin. You know the address? No. Do you know what the name of the apartments are? No. I said, you know how to get there? I said, this guy to this day is a dumbass. And he said, yeah. So I call Austin PD dispatch, and the officer actually goes there and finds the apartment, wakes up the mom. So she calls me, and I said, hey, this is Deputy McGowan, Harris County SO. I said, what's going on with these threats? So she gives me a rundown. And I'd done stuff like this for years. So I knew the questions to ask. And I said, her name was Jeannie Jakes. And I said, Miss Jakes, did you know this Susan White? She goes, I've talked to her on the phone a number of times because my son lived there. And I didn't know at that point that her son had lived there.
Right.
With the informant. And I said, what is your opinion of Susan White? She goes, I think she's fucking crazy from the few phone calls I've had with her.
Right.
And I said, do you think that she has the ability to have him hurt him or have him hurt, or killed? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, that's something I'm going to get a warrant for arrest. She said, all right, I'm relieved to hear that, But she denied this all these years. And I thought at Houston PD, all the conversations were recorded. So when the shit hit the fan on this later, I said, pull the recording. So we don't monitor that stuff here. Oh, you got to be kidding me, man. But anyway, so I do my report, go to the DA's office. And by the time I got down there, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And at midnight, the DA's working intake changed shifts. So I get down there, it was a assistant DA named Jim Mount. You'll see him on these documentaries or whatever, lying his ass off about what happened. So I went in there and I said, hey, I've got this situation. He goes, yeah, I'm a relief. Gene Sprouting Hughes told me what's up, So I go over everything, give him the reports, reads the reports. And then we write up the warrant. He does, And then I signed as the affiant. And by now it's like 4 o'clock in the morning this would be on a Monday morning. And I said, well, just call a judge because that judge is on call. I said, we'll get the warrant signed, I'll run it. He goes, no, I'm not gonna wake up a judge at 4 a.m. for that. I said, look, they're already threatening my informant, man. He's hiding out. We need to get this done. He said, well, I'm not gonna wake up a judge for this. You're the DA, brother. All right, man. So I never touched the warrant. I left it there, right? Big issue. So, but I got off at 6 a.m., which we had take-home cars. So I burned off about 5:30 in the morning. So I bumped Tommy Moore, my day shift deputy that was coming on to relieve me at 6 a.m. I told him what's going on to run the warrant. He said, yeah, I'll go get it. If I wanted to serve this warrant and commit this murder, I wouldn't have left it at the DA's office and called my relief to go get it and go run it that morning. So I go home like 10 o'clock. I'd be like 10 o'clock on Monday morning. My beeper goes off from the DA's office. So I called and it's Tommy Moore. He goes, hey, I'm down here at the judge's office with his prosecutor. And where I had signed as the affiant on the warrant 3 times,
Right.
it had been whited out. And back then they used to actually do that, for whatever reason. And then, so he goes, hey, hold on, man, this DA wants to talk to you. So this female,
They'd whited out your name?
where I
For what reason?
is the affiant. I have no idea. But in my second trial, 10 years later, it got brought up. I said, we used to actually do that. The judge wouldn't sign it because my name had been whited out. And then Tommy Moore couldn't sign for the warrant, our relief deputy.
Okay.
Because he didn't witness any of this. He was going to pick up and run it. And so they, so I said, hey, just leave it there. I'll come back and get it. Well, the prosecutor gets on the phone. And she goes, why didn't he run this fucking warrant? I said, what do you mean? She said, this situation going on, these automatic weapons, threats, and all that, you don't go run the fucking warrant? And I said, hey, man, you need to talk to your coworker, Jim Mount. He wouldn't give the warrant to me. She goes, you need to get in there and run this when you come on duty tonight. All right. So DA's office maintained the warrant. So, of course, Jim Mount denies all this to this day. Did any of that happen? But I went in a little bit early that night, went straight to the district attorney's office to pick up the warrant. It was me, and there was a young Houston police, I was 27, but he's like 22, young Houston PD officer, and they were getting a warrant signed. And the prosecutor at that time, he was Mike Anderson, good guy. He wanted to be in the district attorney, a judge, as did his wife. But and all this tabloid trash out there and books and all the documentaries, I was banging on, I need to get this fucking warrant. I gotta get this bitch on. None of that happened. And if Mike Anderson, many years later, I always protected he and his wife. We were like friends, but I knew him. He was a good dude. I didn't drag him into this. Many years later, in DA's office trying to get me out, they said, if you should have brought Mike Anderson to the grand, you'd never get indicted over it. Oh, but that's the way it goes. But when I was blindly loyal to people I shouldn't have into the system. But this HPD officer, after shooting the shit with him, that DA there, Mike Anderson for a while, we went to Judge Don Shipley's house to get the warrant signed. And we were there like an hour, and he was like an old judge, and he was showing us gun collection and telling us about his wife had recently died. So we went all this in this tabloid trash, me hollering, I need to get this fucking warrant. I need to go there and kill this bitch. And all this. None of that happened, man. None of it, absolutely none of it happened. And so I leave there. I'm on the way to the station. I bumped that asshole sergeant, David Ruggiero, and I said, I've got the warrant. He goes, we'll bring you to the station. All right. So I get in the station. I walk into his office where he maintains safety and security all times because he wouldn't go out on the street. He's too cowardly. Well, deputies Todd Morong and Mike Malloy were sitting there. And I walked in, and the sergeant yanks the warrant out of my hand, looks at it, and he goes, take Morong, Malloy, and go run the fucking warrant. And mind you, this guy, he was from Ohio, in his thick, nasally, whiny accent, skinny. This guy was something else, highly despised by everyone. But he'd say, take Morong, Malloy, and run the fucking warrant. I said, hey, you're the supervisor, man. You need to get your ass out here. I said, there's drugs, gangs, automatic weapons, burglaries involved in this, death threats. I'm not going. Take Morong, Malloy, and run the fucking warrant. No, he said, what are you, fucking pussy? Run the fucking warrant. Matter of fact, the book recently written about this, telling the true story, that's the first sentence in the book. What are you, some kind of fucking pussy? In bold. That's the first sentence of the book. Because that's what that sergeant told me, you know. I said, look, you're the supervisor. You need to get your ass out here and run this thing. What are you, a fucking pussy? Take Morong, Malloy, and run it. I said, all right, you need to get some more deputies. Because when I was with the city, with Houston PD, it'd always be a sergeant, 6 or 8 was to run a felony warrant, no matter what the felony was. I said, you need to get some more deputies out here. And once, what are you, some kind of fucking pussy? Take Morong, Malloy, and run the fucking warrant. I was like, man. And then Another point's made. I hated that sergeant. He hated me and everybody else. But why would I want to get this asshole sergeant to go witness me commit murder? So, what if he had gone? There went my big murder scheme. Done, right? And so Wrong and Laura and I are walking out. And I didn't really know these deputies. I've only been out there a few months. And despite what the media said, we never saw each other off duty. Not until I got out of prison, 25 years later. But that we weren't like buddies or whatever, scheming on this plot. But on the way out, and I've run, I don't know how many felony warrants. I used to be a jump out boy, and I worked a federal task force and all that. I'd run a number of warrants for sure. But I stopped and actually stopped the call, this suspect, which I thought the phone's recorded. So I had her number from when I arrested her son, Jason Aguilar, her criminal son. His whole background is a story. But I called twice. Back when they used to have the answering machines, the phone mate or whatever. And now we had the tape where there was 2 hangups. I was going to go tell her, hey, just because it's a very nice neighborhood, And I didn't know this woman was completely insane and or armed. But I was going to tell her to go get what's called a no arrest bond. You get a bond and a lawyer, and you don't have to spend a day or two in jail. You just post a bond and show up for court the next day or whatnot. She answered the phone. So we're walking out. We stop out by we call our patrol cars the shops. Stop by the shops. And they said, what the hell's going on, man? So I gave them a rundown. They said, all right, let's go run the warrant. So the 3 of us go over there. And we park about a house or 2 down. And
you said she did answer the phone?
No, she did not.
Did not.
No,
okay.
She did not. So she never answered, but
it shows that you called. Somebody called twice, right?
And what if she'd answered the phone? Well, there went my big murder scheme again, right? So we get to the house and we parked the door down, and it was like 1:15 in the morning. And Morong went to the front door, and with me, and Deputy Malloy went to the back to secure the back door. And all this stuff, I think the Breonna Taylor case, I think that's what started this no-knock warrant stuff.
Right.
This is why you don't knock on a door. This is exactly why you do dynamic entry. It's when you force entry, is because if you just do dynamic entry, busting down the door, you have the suspect doesn't have time to grab a weapon, flush the
element
drugs,
of surprise,
hide, flee. You just bunch and snatch them up, But the one time I didn't do it, and this is what happens. But so we go out there, and Deputy Morong bangs on the door, and a couple of bangs. It was dark in the house. It's like 1:15 in the morning, and there was she comes to the door. Suspect comes to the door, clearly on drugs, which she was on 4 different drugs at the time of the shooting after the autopsy. But slurred voice, you could barely understand what she was saying. He kept saying, "Miss White, you need to open the door to the sheriff's department." Well, the suspect had called just previous to that. She'd called 911 34 nights in a row. And this is a history with this woman. She would open the door wearing nothing or a thong or whatnot. And that's what led to some other deputies out there knocking this woman off, if you know what I mean, which went up the chain of command, which got to the captain of the division, Harper, who was also knocking her off. And he'd been married 20-something years. He goes there and starts knocking off this woman. The guy, Morong and Law, we know nothing about this. I just went out there, and they worked in a whole different part of that division, the district that we're in. So they never handled the north end of the division, the district, I should say. But and we knew that she'd been making all these calls. Somehow we picked up on that, saying every night she called somebody broke in my house, somebody's coming here to rob me, just get deputies out there. And so Deputy Morong told her, he said, "Hey, we have some property we recovered. It was stolen. Open the door so we can give it to you." "I'm not opening the door. Who's out there?" And he kept saying, "This is the sheriff's department." And when she said, "This is Deputy Morong, Deputy Malloy, Deputy McGowan," she said, "You need to step out." Morong told the suspect, she heard my name. She starts hollering, "Get that." She never said Kent. That's my middle name. I've always gone by my middle name. If she would have known me, she would have said, Kent, "Get Deputy McGowan off my property. He thinks he owns the world." And Morong did look in the bedroom windows. We're seeing anybody's house. He goes, she's hollering, "You don't look in the ladies' windows, at people in ladies' windows at night." We're looking at each other like, this woman's fucking nut, man. And so this went on for more than 15 minutes. If we just kicked in the door, we could have snatched her up. This suspect, as we get through the story, she escalated this every step of the way. Every step of the way, she could have put a halt to the situation.
Right.
Every step of the way, she kept escalating, which culminated in her death. Me going to prison for 20 years. But finally, I told Morong, I said, hey, let's just kick the door, man. He goes, all right. I said, well, hey, I'm going to back up and call the Sergeant Ruggiero again. It wasn't policy then. You didn't need a supervisor's permission to kick a door. You had a warrant. So I walked over to, walked out the sidewalk, walked over to the driveway, and I bumped the sergeant on the back channels. It only goes like a couple of miles. It's not monitored by the dispatchers. I bumped that sergeant. I said, hey, man, we've been out here 15 minutes. What do you want us to do? You want me to force the door? He goes, it's a fucking felony warning. Kick the fucking door. I said, man, you need to come out here. Well, then he said, he goes, I've been monitoring the radio. I know what's going on. I said, you need to get your ass out of here. He's sitting in the safety and comfort of his air-conditioned office,
right,
which he never left except to go eat breakfast. He wouldn't come out there again, and if he would have said, well, hang on, I'm on the way, well, they're on my murder plot again, right? And so I said, whatever, dude. So I went over and told Morong. I was a pretty good-sized guy. Morong was way bigger than me. I told Todd, I said, hey, Ruggiero said to kick the door, and he was all right. And so it was a big, very expensive-looking double door with cut glass or whatever. And I think, oddly enough, the doors opened outward, I recall. But
it's going to be hard to kick them in.
Yeah, Morong, he's a big old dude, man. He hit it like twice, and it wasn't coming down. And I said, hey, there's no sense in tearing up this door for the county to pay. I said, maintain security here. I won't go around back with Malloy. I'll walk around the house, and Malloy's at the back door. I said, hey, I said, Ruggiero said to kick the door. And he goes, all right. So still we knocked on the back door for 2 or 3 minutes. And while we're knocking on the back door, Morong sees a suspect cruising through the house toward us, So he's trying to tell us on the radio. We're on different radio channels because I was on the back channel. So anyway, Morong comes around the corner of the house right when Malloy starts to kick the door. Mind you, when Morong's at the front door, if Morong would have kicked those doors, he'd been the first one in. He would have wanted shooting the suspect, Then my murder plot would have been gone again, I would have to be the utmost mastermind of crime for this to work out.
Right.
And so we're at the back door. She's burning toward us, but we don't know it. So Morong's coming around to tell us. So I never know Morong's behind me at this point. So I told Mike Malloy, and to this day, these guys' stories have never wavered to this day. Never, And we weren't like friends. They weren't they haven't been, for 34 years backing me up because we're, buddies or whatever.
Right.
Nothing. I've never seen them off duty until I got out of prison. So I told Malloy, I said, hey, just kick the door, man. So Malloy kicked him. And Malloy he's like 6'3". He's also quite bigger.
Big guy.
Yeah. So Malloy leaned back and bam, he kicked the door and nothing. I said, hit it again. And this is like, by now it's like 1:15, 1:20 morning. So Mike hits it a second time. I heard the door frame crack and the alarm was going off. Still to this day, man, the sound of a house alarm, just trigger, if you will. But the door frame cracked and he turned around. And I said, hey, mule kick it, So he turned around, wham, he turns it backward and he bam, kicks it. The door flies in. Malloy goes in first, right? And I don't know Morong's behind me. But right when Malloy goes in to the utility room, the house is trashed. Doesn't me back in a second. The suspect that I shot, insane history. But she married an older husband, I think 56 at the time, I think. She was 43, I was 27. And her husband moved out for a teenage girl that he'd knocked up and had a kid with, and he was 56.
Mm-hmm.
She destroyed the house, all kind of craziness. We'll get to her history in a bit. But the house was destroyed on the inside. When we break in, we had our flashlights, of course, our weapons out, always in a felony warrant. Malloy tripped over the garbage and shit all stacked up in the utility room. Well, he tripped and fell. Well, what's that put me? I'm number 2 in the stick going in, right? So I'm going to cover my guy.
Right.
Just tactically sound in training. I jumped over him to protect him. If Mike Malloy wouldn't have fallen, he would have been the first one in and he would have shot the suspect.
Right.
I'm telling you, if I devise this plan, I'm a pretty smart dude, man. But when Malloy hits the ground, I go over him. At this point, I don't know Morong's behind me. And so directly out of the utility room was a breakfast area, a kitchen, formal dining. And then off to the right was a very large living room area. And there's a door at the opposite side of the wall, which was the door going into the master suite. And if you went to the left, it was like the sleeping area. And to the right was the dressing area in the restroom, shower, and whatnot. I see the suspect crossing, not going through the door, crossing across the door, moving from right to left quickly. I saw something in her hand. Well, I knew she'd been on the old mobile phones you had in your house with pull out antenna.
Right.
This all just happened in a matter of very few seconds. In my mind, it's just, it's crazy. I just got the phone, And also at this point, I know she's been on the phone with 911 and with the sheriff's department. She's calling, wanting to talk to my lieutenant and all this nonsense. They keep telling her, hey, Lieutenant Ken, he's not at work, at this time. And so I know the 911 and the SO, the sheriff's office dispatchers on the phone.
Right.
So at this point, I know it's all being recorded. So I'm going to commit a murder while it's being recorded by the police. I'm a dumbass or a mastermind criminal, So at this point, I see her across the suspect across the doorway. So, of course, we beeline right toward her. The alarm's going off in the house. It's dark, flashlights moving about. We're hauling sheriff's office, felony warrant, come out, we can see her hands. And then there's also a lot of tabloid trash, documentary nonsense about how we beelined right to her bedroom to gun her down. Why didn't we search the rest of the house? I mean, even that asshole DA, Jim Mount, made an issue with this. If I don't care if I'm going there for a traffic ticket or capital murder. If I see the suspect, I'm not going to leave them there and go search the rest of the house.
Right.
So grab a weapon, what happened. And also, when she was moving from right to left, that's where she went and got the handgun out of the closet that she had feloniously bought at a pawn shop because she was a convicted felon, drug addict, alcoholic, psychiatric her entire life. And her own son testified she bought the gun to murder her, to quote, blow Ron's fucking head off. That was her husband who had left her. She bought the gun to shoot him with it. But anyway, I see the suspect crossing right to left. We beeline because there's the suspect. I'm not going to search the house for what? The suspect?
Right.
Yeah, that's because it's always been a big issue. Oh, why did you just run right to her in the bedroom? Well, that's where she was. That's where we saw the suspect. So I'm the first one to the door, the bedroom door, and you don't go running around a corner. So I have my flash, my stream light in my left hand. I have my Glock in my right. I lean in the door. At this point, I see the suspect with a weapon clearly in her right hand. I see this like it just happened yesterday. And she had the weapon in her right hand pointed at me, the right elbow like on the right hip. And I tell her, drop the gun, drop the gun. And when I told her the second time, she brought the gun up at eye level. And now it's the proverbial Mexican standoff. Mm-hmm. I'm in the doorway and she's like barricaded in the left side corner of the room. And she pulled the gun right in my face. There's a little saying, you train like you fight like you train. And I'm in this big house and there's a blonde-headed, blue-eyed lady,
Right.
They caught me off guard, And then I tell her, she comes and points the gun and the weapon was indexed, meaning her finger wasn't on the trigger at this point. But she pulls it up. I see her put her finger, try to move her finger into the trigger. At this point, I holler at her. I said, drop the gun, I'm going to shoot you. I see her put her finger on the trigger and start to pull the trigger. So of course, I fired first,
mm-hmm.
And what I remember this like it just happened, man. What went through my mind for those 2 or 3 seconds, that she was going to gun me down and take out Moronga and Malloy. We all had wives and kids and all this at this point. And that's what flashed in my head because they couldn't see her. Because I went to the entry of the bedroom, the door swung from right to left.
Right.
But it didn't open all the way because behind it was a small dresser, if you will. And then on top of it was a TV, then the old cable converter boxes they used to have. And
you're leaning in the door and they're behind you in the hallway, right?
No, they're literally pushing against me.
Oh, okay.
I don't know Morong's behind me. I just know Mike Malloy is. And then she didn't drop, so I fired. And she's pointing right at me. And round one struck the right cuff and then hit center mass. And it was pretty much an immediate fatality round. But I remember my Glock being with a slide back and the muzzle blast and 2 spent casings in the air, like a Polaroid picture. When the first round struck her, she was somewhat a very slight angle. It knocked her to her left. And bullet 2, following bullet 1, struck the right arm, went through the arm out and into the chest cavity, but it was a non-fatal wound. And then round 3, when I was backing up, which they made a big deal, you have no duty to retreat. In Texas, nobody does, especially police officers. But round 3, I shot and it went through when I fired a round, I was moving back, and it literally went through the cable converter box, the corner of it, and it ricocheted a slight angle. As a suspect,
so it didn't hit her.
Yeah, there's a big issue with that round too. Big issue with that round because she literally fell into the path of the bullet. As she was going down, it struck right here. and went across through here and then that side. And she fell on the bed. And there's another big issue at this point. What if I'd have gone in there, she didn't have a gun? There goes my murder plot again, right?
Right.
I didn't know she had a gun in there. And then, but when she landed on her left side, but face down, and her right knee was over her left knee, which is over, and then her hand was laying underneath her right hand was laying under her right knee with a gun underneath her hand. Well, it was fire the rounds, right? And I look over, I know Malloy's there, right on my shoulder. I tell Malloy, I said, I talked to Malloy, and I said, you heard me, man. I fucking told her, like that. Well, a trial is like this, that we're like wink, wink, nod, nod. Oh, got me right. You heard me tell her 3 times, right?
Right.
It was nothing like that, man. The emotion that hit me was anger. I mean, instantaneously, I was pissed that I was put in that position, and that, and I just looked at him, and when I was saying that, which took maybe a second and a half, 2 seconds, that's the first time I see him wrong. He runs underneath me. He jumps on the suspect landed on a waterbed. He jumped on the waterbed and rolled her over, and he said not the words he used, but he said, I think she's deceased. So I was like, fuck, man. So I back up, I get on the rate. When I run up, the gun's still under her hand. I reach on my left pinky under the trigger guard, and I pitched it on the floor, right? So I saw her gun point. It was pointing straight at me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he's on top of her, and he looked at her and he said, not the words, but he said, I think she's deceased. But sweep back up, and I immediately get on radio. I was using 4176. I said, 4176 shots fired. I said, all deputies okay. I said, all deputies are okay and secured. Suspects down. Roll EMS supervisor in the package. Package being internal affairs, homicide, DA's office. And so Morong and Malloy, I sat at the bedroom door. The shooting happened in the bedroom. I sat at the bedroom door, and Morong and Malloy, they go upstairs to search the rest of the house, make sure there's nobody else there.
Right. And
her son, he was supposed to have been in jail still. We still know how he was out. He was upstairs on 911. He'd been smoking dope, and hey man, there's shots fired in the house. But they, I remember that Morong and Malloy come down, they handcuffed him. They always handcuff everybody. And they bring this, he was 16 at the time. He brings Jason Aguilar, Susan White, the suspect's son, brings him down. I remember that little bastard looking at me and smirking, and all these other documentaries and whatever, they're saying that he looked at me and I was smirking, and Malloy and I are laughing. None of that happened, man. None of that happened. He was smirking at me, so they could put him in the backseat of a patrol car. And finally, Ruggiero, the cowardly sergeant, decides to remove himself from the security and safety of his office, sitting in his chair at his desk, to actually make the scene. It was like maybe 5 minutes out. He's like the third unit there. And so he gets me, and he's like in a panic. He doesn't know what the hell to do, as with every scene involving him. So he puts me in his shop, and he gets in his trunk, gets a legal pad and a pen. So he needs to write down everything that happened. I don't know a fucking thing down, man. You don't do that. And already the union had been contacted. My lawyer was en route, right? So my lawyer gets there, and then homicide, Chuck Leitner. To this day, this guy backs me up. And we'll get to what he's done recently also for me. But each district had a homicide detective on call, 24/7. So Chuck shows up out there, and the DA's office gets there. It's Don Smith, the chief of the, back then they called it the Public Integrity Unit. But they're like the Civil Rights Division. Don Smith, the chief, Ed Porter, prosecutor, and Steve Clappert on his third day there. Steve Clappert was a retired HPD homicide, a clown his entire career. And I knew who Don Smith was because he taught in the Academy Civil Rights or something. I don't know these other people are. So my lawyer gets there, Clint Greenwood, who was assassinated on my birthday in 2017 by some nut. But Clint gets there, and I'd never met Clint before. And so he gets in the patrol car with me. He goes, hey, what happened, man? So he can run down. He goes, sounds cool. He goes, we got to do a walkthrough. I said, all right.
How's he your lawyer because of the
union?
To the union.
Okay. Yeah, he's a union lawyer. And Clint, so with the DA's office and in internal affairs, and oddly in the homicide detective there. Of course, Lieutenant Coons made the scene. And oddly, they told Lieutenant Coons he couldn't go in the house. This day, I don't know why they wouldn't let him go in. But they let Ruggiero to go in there. So we go in. I'm doing the walkthrough. I was standing here. Lloyd and Morong were there. That's just standard procedure, And So we're standing at the bedroom door, and other guys are looking in, looking around, and I'll say Clint Green was my lawyer, my attorney's on my left side. I'm on the right side, and there's right by the door was a big speaker like our moms and dads used to have for the stereos back then day. There was a legal pad laying there, and it was handwriting on it, which we now would copy. And Clint said, "Don't be always, but read what's on there." So I glanced down, and it was a letter written by Susan White, the suspect I just shot, obviously within the 48 hours from when I arrested her son until the shooting dropped. It was a letter to the sheriff. Something to the fact, I'm writing you again about the, your bully deputies out here and blah, blah, blah. And she had one deputy in particular, and there was literally a line drawn she drew. She even knew my name at that point to put in there, And then also on the bed where the shooting, in the bedroom where it happened, where she fell on the bed, there was a record slip that I'd filled out 48 hours earlier when I was towing her idiot kid's son. And she had written on there, Deputy J.K. McGowan, unit number, in her handwriting, unit number 4176. Why would you have to, if she knew me, why don't you write that down? She would know who I was, right? But anyway, we did the walkthrough, man. And everything was cool, I guess. And we went back to the substation. Chuck Leitner, the homicide detective, my lawyer. And there was a lady there. I think she was like the captain's secretary, whatever, was typing. And I gave my statement and that morning. And then I got home. I lived about an hour and a half from there. I got home about 10 o'clock in the morning. And it was on the news at the time. But the early morning news, like 6 a.m., said, and there's lawyers already involved. And it was saying that Morong and Lloyd and I were over there drinking on duty, making basically homemade porn with this chick and all this. We're all going, what the? My beeper's going off, man, on my police buddies, 911. I get home, everybody's calling me. What the hell, man? I said, I have no idea what that is. I drove home. I got home about 10 o'clock that morning. And my days off the time are Monday and Tuesday. So this was Tuesday morning. Got home, my family's all, what happened? And so I gave him a quick rundown, and then I had that Tuesday off. Then I'd go back to work Wednesday night. And I got no one day off for this. I mean, the Houston PD, they had their own, like every agency does now, psychological services. I never had a day off. And I went back to work Wednesday night on my regular 10 to 6 shift. And about a week into it, after the shooting, man, I called Sergeant Ruggiero. I said, hey, man, I'm going to burn my own sick time. I'm going to take a day off. And again, what are you, some kind of fucking pussy? You need to come into work. Everyone's think you're a pussy. I was like, man, hung up on that dude. Even when I asked, I did not get a day off. And it was probably 2 or 3 weeks after the shooting. The patrol bureau major that I had some business with, and these other guys that worked there, we're having dinner somewhere talking about business. And the major said, well, how'd it go with the psychological services? I said, I never went. He goes, what do you mean you didn't go? I said, y'all don't even have a psychological service. He goes, nobody told you to go? And I said, no, I didn't. I told him I asked for zero for just a freaking day off or out of my own pocket, And he denied it. So he wrote it on the address down and said, you need to be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'm going to make some calls. So I went in, and it was a contracted, I think he's a psychiatrist. He's actually still alive, this guy. We reached out to him. But I went in there, and I talked to him for like 20, 30 minutes. I did that MMPI, a very extensive, several hundreds of questions, two different tests. They grade it to make sure what your mental state is. And that took several hours. I did that, and then he graded it or whatever, rated me. He called me in. The doctor said, he goes, okay, you're flatlined all the way, man. I'm going to go ahead and clear you to go back to work. And I said, well, I appreciate that. I've been at work. He goes, what do you mean you've been at work? You've been working since the shooting? I said, yeah, was there 48 hours, less than 48 hours, I was back on the street. He said, what about Morong and Malloy? The guys are with you. I said, they've never come talk to you, have they? And he said, no. I said, they never had a day off. They wouldn't give us a day off when we asked for it. That's a big issue these days. You get in a shooting. But, yeah, that's basically what happened at the actual shooting scene. And then I went back to work. Shooting happened on August 25th of 1992. And then the grand jury came up. And you use a grand jury on a police shooting. It's just SOP. Whenever you injure or kill somebody in line of duty, grand jury always convenes. It just takes a few hours. No big deal. Grand jury's coming up. But let me back up just a split second here. It's a shooting scene. They always take the officer's weapon.
Right.
And they took my Glock. And they supposed to give you the same or similar weapon to carry while they do their ballistics and forensics on it. They gave me an old ass 9mm Beretta. Only had 2 bullets in it, and they're full metal jacket bullets, which we weren't even allowed to carry. You couldn't carry full metal jacket bullets. No extra magazine, nothing, So they gave me this, and I called Lieutenant Coons. I said, hey, I'm going to carry this raggedy. I don't tell them where the gun came from. 2 full metal jackets, so I swore my other gun belt, a 45. But 3 nights after the shooting, I get called in by CSI, which down there they call it CSU, crime scene unit. CSU called me down and said, hey, we got your gun. So I went in there, and this was Deputy Reinhardt, who worked crime scene unit. Reinhardt made, at the night of the shooting, he made the scene to do his crime scene investigation, measurements, photographs. He takes no measurements, no photographs, no video. He left one of the bullets. A bullet just struck across the face, went through the face, punched through the headboard, and it was in between the brick and the sheetrock in the house. He didn't even get it. And I didn't know for a year later when I saw the autopsy pictures what happened to the face, and she was wearing glasses. I didn't even know she was wearing glasses because time of the shooting, you do tunnel vision. All I saw was the gun in her hand. That's all I saw. And then he did nothing. He did absolutely nothing. So they don't even secure the house. Like I said, the shooting happened at approximately 1:30 in the morning. And then after everybody's there and there's deputies walking around, everybody's just milling about the scene. I'm like, what the hell, And then when they leave, I go to the station. When everybody leaves, Reinhardt, the crime scene investigator, leaves, CSU. And they leave the house open. The shooting scene completely open and unsecured. And then when Reinhardt, I guess he got off at 6 a.m. too, the day shift crime scene sergeant, another deputy said, didn't that deputy fire 3 rounds? Why was there only 2 bullets here? I don't know. The other one's still there. So they go back to the house, and this is many hours after the shooting. Sergeant Skiller and a female deputy, crime scene investigator, knew what they were doing. They went back to the house, and there was neighbors in there, people walking around the house. And after we get the crimes, during the discovery for the first trial, there's crime scene photos that somebody had taken, and there's some guy there wearing blue jeans and raggedy tennis shoes. We're like, who the hell's this? It was a neighbor. Homicide, internal affairs are on there. This neighbor just is walking around there. There's, blood, bullet casings and evidence. The neighbor's walking around seeing what's going on. Completely mishandled, to say the least. But when Sergeant Skiller and the other female deputy from crime scene went the next morning, they drained the waterbed and moved it. And they cut a 2-foot by 2-foot section out of the wall
to get the bullet.
And this plays into a very important part. And then the day after the shooting, the suspect I shot, her 56-year-old husband and his 17-year-old girlfriend and their baby move into the house the morning after the shooting. They move in there. So the neighbors made a big issue. Neighbors calling the sheriff's department. This is, he's out here with this kid and her baby. And the sheriff said it was not illegal. Maybe an asshole. There's nothing they could do. So, and the shooting was on Tuesday, and that following weekend, the neighborhood literally this is a neighborhood with doctors, lawyers, engineers, professional people. They literally had a block party to celebrate that woman and her son getting out of that neighborhood because they had terrorized the neighborhood for 10 years, burglarized houses. The kid, the Jason Aguilar, his son, he tried to burn down the next door neighbor's house because they told him don't smoke pot at their pool when they're not there. They had terrorized that neighborhood for all these years. And the morning of the shooting, when Lieutenant Coons and the captain I had out there, Captain Smith, he's a good guy, they brought Jason Aguilar in and told him his mother had been shot. He was like, okay, First thing he does, some lady come and got him. First thing he does, he calls my informant and said, hey, do you still have a key to the house? I'm going to get my mom's jewelry so I can go sell it. It's about 6 hours after his mom gets shot, right? This kid's a turd. He's been in and out of prison his entire life. Actually, both trials, they brought him in shackled because he was in Angola and Louisiana for robbery, burglary, drugs, all kind of stuff. We didn't even try to contact him as a witness when FBI got involved in stuff a few years ago and the writer of the book. But we looked at his Facebook page. This guy is such an idiot. They said we didn't even talk to this guy.
Right.
He's beyond even speaking to. But they, and then we start finding out that my informant, Michael Schaefer, had lived there. And that's how Susan White contacted my informant's family. When they used to have long distance bills, After her son gets arrested, she's all pissed off at home, high on drugs. She starts going through these phone bills and calling numbers she didn't recognize because Michael Schaefer, my informant, who was best friends with her son, had been living there. We didn't know that at the point, of course. And this is a very important aspect of this. My informant, Michael Schaefer, his aunt lives in Killeen, Texas. It's north of Austin. And his mother, Jeannie Jakes, lived in Austin. Susan White made the original phone calls to the aunt in Killeen, Jeannie Jakes. And I had never spoken to that Jeannie Jakes to this day. And then she called the mother, and the mother in Austin. And those two women never spoke after this, from what we understand. The DA's office, they withheld the aunt in Killeen from us for about 15 or 18 years till my writ lawyer got hold of that witness. If they would have brought her to the grand jury, I'd never been indicted because she would have said, yeah, Susan White made these threats. But they, as the story rolls, I got called in to the grand jury, and I was there for 4 hours and 45 minutes. And they're asking me all kind of crazy shit, you know. They're trying to, they subpoenaed my wife to go in there, and she said, well, I don't know nothing about this.
Right.
You know? They started asking her all kind of crazy, because she knew she didn't have to testify against me.
Right.
You know? And then she said, I don't know anything about this, you know. And she was only 27 too. You know, at that point we had 3 kids then, little kids. Well, prosecutors said, all right, what we're going to do, we're going to take you to a judge. We're going to put you in jail for contempt of grand jury. You have to talk, you know. So she's like, I don't know anything about this. And man, I had girlfriends, friends of mine call them whatever. People had nothing to do with it. I did nothing wrong. So there's ballistics, forensics, and all. It all added up.
Right.
And then it went on for 6 weeks. The grand jury it usually takes 4 or 5 hours. 6 weeks, man. All kind of crazy people getting called in. And then finally, I go in and testify. And they gave me this little chrome Raven 25 automatic with pink grips on it. They're trying to get the jury to think the grand jury think that's the gun she pulled. Now, I'm in uniform. I have the pictures of all these. They were photographs are illegally leaked out of the grand jury we have. But I was like, that's not the gun she pulled, man. Was it similar? No, it's not. You know, little pink grip, looks like a toy, you know?
Right.
And so they're getting me to position the prosecutor, how the suspect was and whatnot. And at the end of this, they said, any grand jurors have any questions for Deputy McGowan? And this old white guy sitting on the end says, well, I have a question. I have a couple questions. Here we go. And he said, why didn't you shoot the gun out of her hand? I said, why do you watch stupid movies? I said, that's not even legal to do technically.
Right.
If somebody's pointing a gun at me, I try to shoot. A, if I miss, I'm going to hit him in the chest.
Right.
If B, I could hit the weapon. If they weren't going to fire, it could have fired and shot me. I said, that's ridiculous. Then he said, why don't you fall back and call SWAT? I said, I was basically the SWAT team out there. I said, I'm for the sheriff's department. We don't have SWAT. We don't have VICE. Nothing. It's just a handful of patrol guys out there in the county. And then it was utter insanity. And then I was on August 28th, I get a call from the Major Wiedemeyer, patrol bureau major that was in business with. I was in my house on my day off, and he said, he's kind of whispering. He said, hey, can you hear me? And I was like, yes, sir. And he said, hey, you need to come down to internal affairs. I said, all right. He whispered in quieter, and I said, yeah. And he goes, you bring your lawyer. All right. And so I called Bob Thomas, retired Houston PD sergeant, is one of my attorneys. And he said, hey, they're probably going to give you a day or two off, fishing days. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And I said, well, all right. So I drive all the way down to pick up Bob. And then we go to internal affairs. And I'll never forget this, man. I walk in there, and at the ID, Internal Affairs Division captain desk was saying the patrol bureau major, my major. And then there's a homicide captain, an internal affairs captain, some big heavyset old deputy I've never seen before since our detective. And major told me to sit down. I said, yeah, my lawyer's standing behind me. He goes, man, I don't know how you tell you this. I said, yeah. And he said, they dropped sealed indictment on you today. And I was like, and then felt Bob clench on my shoulders. And he said, lawyer said, for what? And he said, for murder. And I literally felt like I got slammed in the chest with a baseball bat. Because, I'd had no problems in law enforcement, military, life-saving medal, chief of police accommodations, civilian accommodations. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, I literally felt like I got slapped in the, banged across the chest with a baseball bat. And Bob Thomas goes, "You're not handcuffing him." You know, so they all start hollering. And because they knew what was going on. That was being set up. Well, that old detective, I've never seen before or since. He goes, "Let me tell you something, Deputy McGowan." He said, "I've been here 46 years. 42 years I've spent in homicide and internal affairs, thousands of shootings, hundreds of police shootings." He said, "This is the cleanest fucking shoot I've ever seen." He said, "You had a warrant, a lawful warrant signed by a judge. You had 2 deputies that were there with you, didn't even know. The gun in the suspect's hand, we found the box. She illegally bought it, and her own son gave us a statement that she was going to bought to blow Ron's fucking head off her, you know." He goes, "What scares me is," he said, "this could be me or any of the 8,500 officers in this county sitting where you're sitting right now." So that wasn't much consolation. But I was like, "What the fuck, man?" And so we go out, we're walking down the hallway. There stands John Denholm, his homicide lieutenant. He's at fault for all of this, smirking at me. And then I go down to we get in a bunch of cool cars, just plainclothes cars. There's a few miles to the headquarters from the detective bureau. So I went downtown, and they didn't put me in jail or anything, of course. I went to the ID division captain's office, and he's an old guy I'd never seen before sitting there. And I'm sitting there like, "What now?" And he said, "Well, they're going to bring in the fingerprint and all that for you." I said, "All right." He goes, "Let me tell you something, McGowan." He said, "You and I made history." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We're the only 2 in the state of Texas. We're the only 2 police officers that have ever been, indicted on a line of shooting." I said, "Well, how'd it work out for you?" And he said, "Well, I've been here 36 years. Worked out. It'll work out, man." And I was the first police officer in this country to get indicted, convicted, and sent to prison on a line of duty shooting. This, first one ever. Now it happens quite often, apparently. But that set off another chain of events. And then I've been asked, and then after that I went home, and I never set foot in jail then. But I always get asked, why this happen? Because of John Denholm. John Denholm was a big, slovenly, obese, loudmouth sergeant from Ohio. And he's another of these guys. And he was friends with David Ruggiero, my cowardly sergeant. They're buddies. And they're also from Ohio. Both of them are. Not that everything is Ohio, but these guys are just Ohioans. But I walked down, that asshole smirked, man. And then when John Denholm was a sergeant, when I was an instructor, Deputy Ron Ackerman and I were instructors. There's about 12 of us, I think, they were instructors. And this Denholm bullied everybody. I mean, mentally and physically, especially the rookies that come in. He'd talk shit to them and degrade them, whatever. And Ackerman and I are the only ones who'd stand up to him, at all. And Ackerman, we'd have been at other police agencies before we went there. And we bumped heads with this dude for like a year and a half. And I caught him tampering with my payroll in Ackerman's one time. I should have arrested him. This would have never happened. But John Denholm was involved in this very corrupt clique run by another major, not Wiedemeyer. And 2 days after my shooting, this major promotes Denholm to lieutenant and puts him in charge of homicide. But he had no experience in homicide. He'd been an admin sergeant, payroll and overtime and shit. That's all he did. But mind you, also at this time when I got indicted was October 28th of 92, was election year. At this point, Johnny Holmes was the DA and Johnny Clevenhagen was the sheriff, and they despised each other. And it was election time. They're trying to get each other kicked out of office. Here I am with the sheriff's department. I get in the shooting. Here's this DA, he's trying to get his buddy to be the next sheriff. So I just got all that got thrown in the mix. That is for gas. I got tangled up in all that political nonsense. But back to Denholm, that dude, he had personal issues with Ackerman and me because we stood up to him all the time. And then jump ahead, when I'm dealing with the Texas Rangers many years later, which we'll get to, I'm telling the Rangers about this Denholm. And they're like, "Wait a minute, you and Deputy Ackerman were the only ones who stand up this loudmouth bully Denholm." Yeah. They said, "You and Ackerman wound up going to prison." And Denholm was a lead investigator on both y'all's cases. And Val Senicelos, that Ranger, he said, "This has not raised red flags for anybody." At that point, it had been 25 years. Mm-hmm. I said, "Val, I've been hostage 25 years. Nobody's listening." And he said, what did he testify against at your trial? He said, he never testified in my trial, either one of them. And he's saying, well, he said, "Why not?" And I said, because it would come out the animosity this guy had toward me personally. He said, "Well, who from homicide testified against you?" "Nobody. I was cleared by homicide." He goes, "Well, who from internal affairs testified against you?" "Nobody. I was cleared by internal affairs." Man, he said, well, how in the hell did you get convicted and sent to prison? I said, man, piss poor lawyer. Piss poor lawyer, and you're dealing with a corrupt system out there. He couldn't believe it, man. But yeah, that Deputy Ackerman, he did 17 years. My partner did on assault that he did not do. You know, from what I've talked to people involved in that, the witness even said, I mean, the victim, if you will, said it was completely consensual. You know, but when I got indicted, that really started flaring up stuff, man. Because Ed Porter, this prosecutor, and Clapper and Denholm, Clapper being the DA investigator, my wife and I, man, we had the suspect shot was from Louisiana, and we'd found dead fish in our mailbox, dead shrimp. I guess there's some obviously a connection there, or crawfish, I should say, in the mailbox. Tires on vehicles cut, brake lines cut. Got the house was shot up. It was one thing after another. We'd be at a restaurant eating, and they'd be sitting on the parking lot, hey, you know, waving at us and stuff. It was this constant ridiculousness. But when we, after I got indicted,
I was going to say, did you get a lawyer?
Oh yeah, well, at this point I had my union lawyers.
Yeah, but they're going to drop you, right?
No, they stayed on. Brian Binkin and Clint Greenwood. Yeah, well, my family paid them. The union paid, I think, $5,000. My family paid them the rest, and they were good guys, man. And like I said, Clint got assassinated on April 3rd. 2017, but Clint and Brian, Clint Greenwood actually worked for the Public Integrity Unit, they called it then, the Civil Rights Division. It was going after me, and Brian was also worked for the DA as a white collar crimes prosecutor. Well, they were just going along, you know, everything was cool, man. They were just believing what they were being told, you know. And they were just outgunned and misled. You know, these dudes just set me up, but. Going into this, it just started craziness. And the shooting was October 25th. I mean, it was August 25th, 92. Got indicted October 28, 92. Went to my first trial in February of 94. And I had a great judge, A.D. Azios, World War II veteran, POW. He said the whole time, there's no way I'm sending you to prison if the law let me keep you. He knew what was going on.
Right.
And so we go into trial, and let me back up real quick on how far the system is in Houston, in Texas. The grand juries are picked by judges. So you have these old judges, and they pick all their buddies to be on the grand juries.
Right.
So, you know, back then, all your grand jurors are old, wealthy white guys and old, wealthy white ladies, you know. And so you're going to get indicted. I mean, they're getting $30 a day or whatever it is because they're retired. They have nothing to do. So their job is in there, bam, 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 indict everybody. But we go to the first trial, and it was a joke. It was an absolute joke. And I testified in my first trial. And we had one, there was an old cowboy on my trial. I remember he would always chewing on a toothpick. And he's leaning back one day, sound asleep, sucks a toothpick down. They had to rescue that out of his throat. And then in my second trial was with the lawyer. But they were, when Deputy Reinhardt, the crime scene investigator, took the stand. I testified, then Reinhardt testified. And because the suspect's gun, the fingerprints been wiped off, it had been handled by many people. That's a whole crazy story. But after Reinhardt testifies, Steve Clapper, the DA investigator, testifies. Well, he's up there saying that, which is true, the only thing he said true, 5 days after the shooting, Ed Porter, the head prosecutor, and Don Smith, the division chief, Steve Clapper, the DA investigator, worked for them, and Lieutenant John Denholm, they all went back to that house 5 days after the shooting, and which we have a copy of the video now. And they, the suspect's husband, his girlfriend, the baby, they've lived there for 5 days. The furniture's been moved around. The waterbed has at least once been drained and moved by the crime scene guys the day after the shooting. Well, they go in there and they do their infamous, we call it the string theory, if you will. They're stretching strings like they did back in the 70s, 60s, where I should have been standing and the bullet holes going through here and there. They actually had lasers back then that they could have done that with. And then, so Clapper's up there on the stand, and Reinhardt just testified, about the bullet hole and them having to go back and cut it out. So my lawyers, the prosecutor's questioning the crime scene division guy, Deputy Reinhardt, about that. And he testified in that 2 foot by 2 foot section of sheetrock that was cut out the day after the shooting. It's laying right there on the prosecutor's table. Well, they bring their own investigator, Steve Clapper, takes a stand. And he was testing out going back there 5 days later. And he said, yeah, well, the angle shot, McGowan had to be standing, because their story, the prosecutor's story was that I shot her in the face first, and then I went up and shot her through the arm, which makes absolutely no sense. Then I stood over for a coup de grace, round through the chest to kill her, in front of 2 deputies that I didn't even know. But there was no gunshot residue, none on the suspect. No stimpling from why I stood over and shot her. No gunshot residue, her clothing or her. There's no gunshot residue at the foot of the bed. So I had to be, when I fired the shots, I had to be at least 11 feet from the suspect. And the DA started telling the jury, I stood over and shot her through the chest to kill her, but she was begging for help. But she didn't make sense, But when Clapper was up there committing egregious, aggravated perjury, one of the things he said is, the bullet hole through the headboard, and then it went through the angle into the bullet hole in the wall. That's how they determined where I was standing. So my lawyer, Clint Greenwood, gets up there and said, well, wait a minute. You went in there. How did you determine the bullet hole through the headboard, how it coordinates the bullet hole in the wall to get the angle? He said, I pulled my pen out of my pocket and stuck it through the hole in the headboard in the wall. My lawyer's going, well, you use your pen? He goes, oh, actually, I had a wooden dowel in my pocket. Did you carry a wooden dowel around in your pocket for such things? Oh, yeah. And mind you, there was a 2 foot by 2 foot section on the wall. Mm-hmm. So everybody's looking at each other like, knowing this guy's lying. So my lawyer asked Clapper, he said, well, did you look behind the wall, behind the headboard? And he goes, yeah. He said, was a room under construction? No. Was the wall there? And he goes, yeah. He goes, how big was the hole? And he goes, the size of a large caliber handgun. Well, yeah, it was a 2 foot by 2 foot square. So as you know, you could put it through there and wiggle your pen or wooden down the way you wanted. But go ahead in the story. I got convicted on that. They gave me 15 years. And in Texas, they have a they have a 2-part trial.
This is on the first
trial in 94. Okay. Yeah. And so, long story short, I get found guilty. I get 15 years. And when they found me guilty on Thursday, the prosecutor wanted $1 million bond for me to come back the next morning. So the judge said, Mr. McGowan, you'll be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Yes. He was go home and just try to relax, All right. So I went back the next morning and they gave me 15.
Wait. You said they want $1 million bond.
Yeah, for me for overnight.
But you didn't.
No, hell no. No, the judge said
The judge said, okay, just come back.
Just come back.
Yeah.
He knew what was going on. And anyway, they so next morning I go in there and they give me 15. Well, at the time in Texas,
who gives you 15?
The jury.
The jury, not the judge.
Yeah,
okay.
In Texas, you can have a trial by judge or trial by jury. Yeah. You can also divide it. I want to have a trial by judge where the guilt or innocence verdict, and then the jury can give you punishment or vice versa. It's
that's insane.
Yeah.
In the feds, it's the jury determines your guilt. The judge gives you the sentence.
You can either way you want in Texas. Yeah. It's whatever the defendant wanted.
But what's like the narrative or the argument for them to convict you? Like, what's the, your argument is like, hey.
That's the crux of it. Yeah. The state's theory was this, that I was either dating the suspect or.
How do they prove that?
They didn't, because it never happened.
Okay.
And that's the whole crux of this whole thing. They said I was either dating her or I was making advances on her and I'd spurned her advances.
Even though you'd only barely met her one time the night before.
I've seen this woman 3 times in my entire life. When I went out there on April 3rd of 92 to patrol that district, she was in the hospital in, I think, North Carolina in a psych ward. She'd been down to mental institutions her entire life. And they pumped her up that she was a naval officer, which is absolutely not true. She was enlisted. She went through basic training at the Great Lakes. And she, when she was getting on a plane after she got a basic training to go be, I think, a dental hygienist, they found her a bunch, back in the day, Quaaludes. So they immediately kicked her out of the Navy. She was never a nurse, not like that. She was never an officer because she had no college degree. And then they said that she was an RN. Well, no, in Louisiana, she's from Louisiana originally. The suspect actually went to like LVN school, like a technical thing. Where she only worked as a nurse, if you will, for 2 weeks till she got caught writing her own prescription on a DEA pad. She was writing her own scripts. And so we have copies on that. She got her license permanently revoked from the state of Louisiana. And then she was married to a guy here in Louisiana. She'd been married a number of times. He was a police chief in some little podunk town in Louisiana, Swamp River. But she tried to murder him. And that's how she wound up going to Houston. She took her kid, this Jason Aguilar, when he was young, and she fled to Houston. She didn't know anybody in Houston because she tried to kill this police chief husband of hers. And they're just a big I don't talk negatively about the dad, but they're just white trash people,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Well, she comes into Houston and she winds up meeting this guy named Ron White, who was a big wig with some organized crime connections. And he really didn't like her. And she squirrels him into marrying her because she had a kid and she needed some money. So she starts, knocking off this guy. And so he's playing golf, this very expensive golf club where they lived. And he comes around a hole and she's got a, what do you call it? The archway, flowered archway. And she's standing in a wedding dress in a justice of peace there with a marriage license. And he's out playing golf with his buddies. So he's like, okay, whatever, man. But she was a total nut. Man, he tried to get rid of her multiple times, and he was having affairs with the secretary, and then he winds up getting their illegal alien maid knocked up, his 17-year-old girlfriend. He was 56. And then but her whole history was like that. I mean, I'm not defending her at all, anything she did, but the system absolutely failed this woman her entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with the drugs, the alcohol, mental health issues, in and out of mental hospitals, voluntarily and involuntary. She's escaped from a number of them. One escape she pulled, she escaped out of a mental hospital and she catches a cab. I don't recall where it was. But the police immediately catch her. And she jumps out saying that she escaped because the female doctor had raped her. And the cab driver just picked her up a few minutes early. She's saying he tried to molest me. That was her go-to.
Right.
That I'm being sexually harassed, I'm being molested and whatnot. And then multiple histories of this. Well, when she was in Houston, she actually got a job at a mortgage company. The same thing. I mean, she would go in there high on drugs and alcohol, saying that, she was, being molested. She started accusing the owner of the mortgage company. He never even met her. So at the time of the shooting, he had a deal where he was giving her like $1,200 a month. Just don't come to work, because she was a nut. And she only had one friend named Helen Bozada, who was just a big of a nut. And it's Helen Bozada. She was so crazy, they didn't even brought her to the grand jury or to the testify at all. But that was her whole basis, because ballistics, forensics, they connect. Back then, of course, we had beepers. They subpoenaed my pager number. She had and I lived either at my dad's ranch or at my lake house, both from different counties, about an hour and a half out from Houston. She had never called me. There was no record of me ever calling her. Nobody ever seen us together. She never mentioned my name to anybody until the 48 hours for the shooting on arrested her son.
Right.
And the only time I ever saw that woman, here we go with this one. I had a civilian observer, do a ride along with me. And we just cleared a major disturbance. I'm dealing with TABC. But anyway, there was, I'm driving down TC Jester, and she lived about 3 houses down the street. I see a patrol car parked in the driveway of this house. And I knew all the deputies, there's so few of us, I knew all the deputies lived out there. And I thought, I was in my beat. I already got the call if a call dropped, right? So I turned around, and what was odd was parked in the driveway. You don't park in front of a house for you get a call, particularly in the driveway, because there's an ambush. You need to be able to get out quick. The front door's open. And this is the house where the shooting occurs about 3 weeks later. And I had a civilian guy with me, and I walk in, and there's Deputy Matt Smith kicked back in the lazy boy chair to the right, and some teenagers standing behind him. And one of them was Michael Schaefer, who wound up being my informant. And Jason Aguilar, the suspect's son. Well, the suspect's sitting in a chair over in the corner. I never even look at this woman because, to be honest with you, the pictures I've seen, I even told my lawyer, you need to bring my wife and some girls I've dated and put them on the stand. She had rotted teeth, skinny, bleach blonde, was a non-attractive woman. But I didn't even look at her, neither did she. And it was even brought up. These teenagers did admit this, that they'd never even looked at each other. Well, I look at Matt Smith, this deputy. I was like, what are you doing? First I looked, the gun I get pulled on me 3 weeks later, sitting on a bar right on the door. I look at this firearm and I look at him. I said, why's there a gun laying here? And he goes, I got it, man. I got it. It's cool. So I'm like, everything cool? And he said, yeah. And I was like, all right. I mean, clearly he wasn't there on a call, but he was on duty. Right. He was in uniform and a patrol car out there. And so I really thought nothing of it at the time. But later in years, when this tabloid trash book was written about my case, the woman, the very grasping, police-hating female in Houston, when she wrote this book, she put in the book that Susan White, this is just previous to the shooting, that Susan White was saying to this lady, a friend of hers, that she'd been dating a deputy named Matt, M-A-T-T. Well, this deputy's name was Smith, And in the book, she kept saying Matt. Then she said, and parenthetically, or was it Mac? My last name, of course, is McGowan.
Right.
I've never gone by Mac. Nobody in my family's ever gone by Mac. And she says Matt, and that was Matt Smith.
Right.
He was known to be having a fling with this woman, as with several other deputies we found out later, and the captain. But they, back in the story, that was basically her history. Her family had not spoken with her for over a year, more than a year before the shooting. They just like given up on her with the drugs and whatever. But I got indicted. I got convicted. I got the 15th of first trial in 94. And the judge calls me up to the bench. He'll bring your lawyer. And he said, you need to go out and get a good appellate lawyer and get this taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't know why I said this. I said, who do you recommend? He goes, your lawyers know who to call.
Right.
I can't tell you, but this is on a Friday afternoon. And so we walk out and walk to the payphone and immediately call Max Seekers, George McCall Seekers, my appellate lawyer. Brilliant lawyer. You know, this is after my first trial. He kept my case. We won 4 out of 4 of appeals. It took almost 10 years. I was on appellate bond longer than anybody I know in Texas. I don't know about anywhere else. But
so you're found guilty, you're sentenced, but
15.
you stay out on bond.
Yeah, I never stepped foot in jail.
Okay.
I went home that night. When I got the 15, we're all excited, you know, because I was looking at a life sentence.
Right.
Know? And then, because we knew if we got 15 or less, I was going home. So everybody's like, well, he's awful excited. Yeah, I'm not going to prison for life, you know. So that was on a Friday. Monday, went and hired Max Seacrest. And that started the appellate division, appellate for my first trial. Was a brilliant lawyer. He's still practicing to this day. But he won 4 out of 4 appeals. But during this appellate division, we started getting death threats again. Excuse me, my parents were, I was. And then it started spinning out of control. Every time I got a job, the DA's office would call and tell the people, oh, he's a convicted murderer, he's a killer, you know?
Yeah.
And I was on a bond in Texas, I don't know, you're not convicted till your appeals are over. I wasn't convicted of a freaking parking ticket at this point, you know? So I want to be an entrepreneur. But I was working for this company, and I was on the road quite a bit. And I was in Birmingham, Alabama, and I called home, and I call home at 9 o'clock every night. My kids were still little at this point. And my wife had just left and took my kids to their cousin's house down the street for a birthday party. And this is right at Christmas time, so it's dark early. Well, she came in, and she said, right when she shut the door, 5 seconds later, I was knocking on doors. You had to be like hiding in the bushes by the house. And it was Ed Porter, this prosecutor. He had a thing for my wife. He'd go to her, stalk her at her job. We had to call the sheriff to go put a restraining order against the prosecutor. Every time we changed phone numbers, he would just get a subpoena and get new ones, constantly hassling her or whatever. But he knocks on the door and she opens the door by herself. And I always told her, don't open the door, look out the peephole. She just, opened it in the neighborhood. And he was like a big, lurking, bulgy-eyed, patchy-haired old guy, like late 50s. For then he was old to us. But he goes in and is telling her all kind of crazy shit that he could arrange for me to be in jail, so he can want to spend Christmas with my wife and kids. And he screwed up, man. He told Michelle, my wife, he told her that he had been living with a woman for 17 years, and she'd recently left him, and his daughter had recently passed away, and that he was out to spend Christmas alone. There's no way we would have known that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, I call home at 9 o'clock that night, and she's hysterical. I said, what? She's just screaming, he broke it down. And he was there for more than 2 hours. And so she finally calmed down and told me, so I called my lawyer that I had then was Dick DeGuerin, and he said, man, have her in my office tomorrow. And so I was trying to get back from out of town. They called the judge, and the judge ordered that prosecutor stay away from us, He still didn't. Well, the judge calls us in and said, he said, look, I have grave, because my kids are in private school, and they would show up at the private school and try to talk to my kids, like in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade or something like that. The judge called us in one day and said, he goes, look, I have concerns for you and your wife's safety over this. He goes, I have particularly grave concerns over your children, something happening. Is there somewhere you have relatives out of state? And I said, well, yeah, Tennessee and whatnot. And I don't know why I asked this, because my wife and I used to live in Montana in the military and loved it. I said, can we go to Montana? He goes, look, you've never been late to a hearing. As long as you be on a call, I don't care where you go. You can get out of the state. So my mom and dad watched our kids at this point, and Michelle drove to Montana, like 2,600 miles. We're gone like 10 days. We're on our way back, and we stopped in outside of Butte, Montana. And we stopped at this little motel. And then I went down to get hamburgers or pizza or whatever, and I came back in the afternoon. And I see these 4 sheriff's patrol cars pulling out of the hotel. And so I was like, oh, that's weird. I went in and the door to our room was kicked down. Michelle soaking wet, nothing but my wife with a towel wrapped around her, hysterical, crying. I thought he broke in a. What the hell happened? And it took me a good 5, 6, 7 minutes to calm her down. Well, she had called Houston, called her sister, and the DA had an illegal trap and trace, a bug, if you will, on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Not we're hiding. I mean, my bondsman lived across the street from me. He's my fishing buddy. The judge told us to go. This asshole prosecutor, Ed Porter, called the sheriff's department up there, told him I'd kidnapped my wife. That was a murder, and I'd kidnapped my wife. So I was a convicted murderer, which I wasn't. I'd kidnapped my wife. I was a driver to Montana to murder her and bury her in the mountains, right? So, of course, these redneck sheriff up in Montana summons a posse, and they go to the hotel and kick in the door while she's in the shower. Man, I'm pissed. I call my lawyer again. He goes, where are you? I said, we're outside of Butte, Montana. He said, get here as soon as you can. Well, I couldn't drive her like that. So I put her on a plane, and she flies to Houston. I think I drive her to Missoula, to the airport. She flies to Houston. My mom, my sister were there to pick her up. Well, here at the airport, she steps off the plane, and there's Ed Porter, the prosecutor, Steve Clapper, and John Denholm. The guys that set me up. And they tell Michelle that she has to go to the DA's office. They didn't know, you have to go with us. So she goes. My mom, my sister follow them. And they're showing them autopsy pictures. This is what your husband's going to do to you. He's a murderer. This is what he does to women. You're trying to turn her against me all this time. But that shit went on for, 9.5 years in between trials. And mind you, by now our kids are teenagers. Then we even had another baby during this, our youngest one, many years later. But every time, for all those years, every time my beeper went off, there was a phone call or knock at the door, which you have teenagers, that happens a lot. I could have been turning myself in to go to prison, So every time that phone rang or a beeper went off or a knock on the door, I cringed for 10 years, Then that took a toll on me, And then finally, we won all the appeals. And the DA's office said they weren't going to try me. So
you won all the appeals?
Yeah. I took almost 10 years on appeals.
Okay, so why are there multiple appeals?
We kept winning. Well, in Texas,
so you'd win, and then they'd refile.
They would appeal that appeal. So we went from the Court of Appeals, and then we filed what's called a petition for discretionary review at the Court of Criminal Appeals in Austin, which is the highest appellate criminal appellate court in Texas. We won the PDR, and then the prosecution. I got my. It was April 3rd when I got the first case overturned. I remember it was my birthday. And Stephanie, Max Sechrist, it took 36 months to get that first win. It was my birthday. At 7 a.m, I picked up the phone to Stephanie, Max Sechrist, my appellate lawyer's secretary, and she goes, Ken. I said, yeah. She goes, Mac needs to talk to you. Hang on. So I'm like, I'm waiting for at this point 3 years.
That's fucking horrible.
I'm going to hold for like 10 minutes, man.
Right.
I'm like, wow. Michelle's asleep, right? And then Mac gets on the phone. He goes, we fucking whipped their ass. What do you mean? He goes, we won. Every judge, we won unanimously. And I think it's over,
right?
So I break down like a little biatch, and Michelle's, and I said, I'm going to have to call you back, And then Michelle's like, she thought I'm going to prison. I said, no, we won. What? And so I call the family, whatever. So I call Mac back, and he said, hey, I need you to come to office today. And we live quite a ways, a couple hours from downtown Houston. And he, I said, all right. And so I go to his office, and I said, what happens now? I thought it was over. He goes, oh, they're going to appeal it. So what do you mean? And then they filed what's called a PDR, petition for discretionary review, to the appellate court in the Court of Criminal Appeals in Austin. That took like 2 years. We won then. The DA's office appeals it again back to the 14th Court of Appeals in Houston, what they call a hearing in bonk, when all 11 judges, instead of 3, all 11 judges listened. All 11 voted it was a bullshit deal.
Right.
Then they appealed it again on what's called a harmless error analysis. At this point, the DA's office was saying, we fucked up, but it wasn't so bad that a jury would have found him not guilty. That was their last grasp. Well, we won on the hearing in bonk, and it's changed federal and state law actually for that. But now the burden of proof on a harmless error analysis falls on the prosecution and not the defendant. Nonetheless. And so the DA's all said, okay, we're going to retry him. Man. So a very wealthy uncle at the time, and he went to when he passed away. But he called me to his house. He said, look, man, I'm going to cut the check. This is destroying the entire family, extended family. And he said, go talk to the top 5 lawyers in the state, narrow it down to 3, then we're going to meet with them. Which I went and talked to Max Sechrist, my appellate attorney first, right? And he said, he was kind of a cowboy dude, the old barnwood door. He said, let me tell you something. He said, I can handle this case. And he had 14, you know what a Brady violation is, right? That's basically when the prosecution is called lot cheating.
Yeah.
We had 42 Brady violations. And you only need one thing to get overturned in appeals. We had a very blatant, which the judge intentionally did it for us, so I get overturned. But he goes, look, Secret said, look, I can't tell you we're not going to go to trial, but with Brady violations, our chances are pretty slim. All right. And my lawyer said, well, what's your fee? And he said, $1 million. You want $1 million cash up front, non-refundable retainer. And we should have done it. I would have never gone to prison and it would have been cheaper in the long run. But he said, it's a non-refundable retainer. It's going to run way over that. You're going to have to pay it. You couldn't argue with the guy because he won.
Right.
We'd see his briefs or whatnot credits, and it was like a PhD battling with kindergartners. It was just brilliant, you know. And so we talked to him, talked to Dick DeGuerin, and biggest mistake of my life. Went and talked to Dan Cogdell, my lawyer. I wound up getting. And Brian Binkin and Clint Greenwood, they're good dudes, man, but they're just low-keyed. You know, I wanted a big, brash loudmouth who wasn't scared of anybody, didn't give a shit, you know, no matter what it cost. And I'd seen Cogdell around I never talked to him before, but I'd seen him around the courthouse and whatnot. And so I go to meet with Cogdell. It's a pretty badass office, and there's another lawyers that work with him, an investigator and paralegals, where these ladies were. And we're going to take the case. We'll take the case. You know. All right. So I hit my uncle and I said, well, I think we should go with Cogdell. You know, and he was lying. That wasn't even his office. We found out he had not practiced law in a year. He knocked up some dancer chick, paid her $1 million, let him have the kid. This guy's something else, man. We wound up hiring Cogdell. And then so I went and sat down with Cogdell, and he told us it'd be $300,000. So Uncle paid him $300,000. And it was a lot more than that. I found out later. But I was explaining to Cogdell, you know, the situation, you know, and at our first meeting. And he said, he asked me what you did. He said, what are they saying happened? I said, well, they tried to say that I knew this woman. He goes, did you ever see her anywhere? And she had this thing for police officers. She was banging some deputies out there and the captain. And there's some probabilities of some couple of people in between the major and the deputies in rank, but nonetheless. But I explained to him, I said, I've only seen this woman 3 times in my entire life. Well, I told you earlier about when Deputy Matt Smith was there. Yeah. I saw her. I saw her 40 hours before the shooting, when she also didn't know me then. 40 hours before the shooting, when she didn't know me when I arrested her son. The 3rd time I saw that woman, the only words I ever said to her, you need to get your ass out of here, you're going to jail. It's the only words I ever said to that woman, besides, drop the gun, I'm going to shoot you. Right. You know? And that's what I'm responsible for. And they did everything they could to try and, you know, find some connection. We know Al Kelly was a deputy who testified against him in the last trial. He was in the process of leaving his wife and moving in with Susan White at the time of the shooting. That comes up after my first trial, you know? But and everything I'm telling you was documented. And Jerry Langton, who wrote the book that recently came out, we'll get to that in a little bit, but just one thing. He told me, he said, you know something? He goes, I've interviewed thousands of people in my career doing this, Kent. He said, do you know the difference between you and everybody else I've interviewed doing things like this? And I said, well, my quick wit, my smirky smile, my sparkly eyes. He goes, no, asshole. He said, you have the receipts, you know. Mind you, I've been gone for 20 years, so I'm still catching up on his terminal. I said, what does that even mean? He goes, because he fact checks everything. You know, he's an investigative journalist and whatever. He said, everything you've told me, I've talked to the witnesses, I've seen documents. He said, you have documents proof everything that's happened. And I said, yeah. But anyway, they, I met with Cogdell, and he said every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday is going to be McGowan time from 3 to 5. And we had 11 months. Mm-hmm. Actually, I hired him in March. We wound up almost going to trial the following Thanksgiving in 2002. And not one time in 11 months did I ever go to his office and discuss the case. Never. Every time he was friends with Johnny Caraba's, he owns Caraba's restaurants, and Damian Mendola's famous uncle. All we'd do, we'd go to Johnny Caraba's, and Dan was friends with Lyle Lovett, that country singer, guy used to be married to whatever her name was, Julia Roberts. But they go in there and we'd eat and they'd drink and smoke cigars. That's all we ever did. And about my second or maybe the 3rd time to go do that with Dan, we're coming back, and his co-counsel, Alan Goodling, There we call them Jack Shacks, these little Oriental massage parlors, you know. He pulls into one, a gravel parking lot. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, we're going to go here and get a hand job, man. I thought he's bullshitting me, right? I said, what? He goes, yeah, we do this every day after lunch. I'm thinking, this is what we're doing with my family's money?
Right.
I said, are you fucking kidding me, man? He goes, nah, we do it all the time. You gonna go in or what, man? I said, man, hell no, man. I said, nah, we'll do it later. So I went to his office and I left. But that went on for from March until we finally got a court date. It was like the week before Thanksgiving. And during this time period, we'd go eat. And a few times I go to his office, we'd sit there and they'd smoke cigars and drink scotch and talk about nothing. And after about 2 months into it, I said, Dan, what's our game plan here, man? I shit you negative, man. This guy looks at me and goes, let me tell you something. Here's what we're going to do. Because he fancies himself a big GQ ladies man, dude. But he said, here's what we're going to do, man. He said, look, when we have voir dire, when we pick the jury, he said, don't just stare at him, make eye contact with the best looking women in the jury pool. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, we'll get them on the jury. He goes, every time I do this, he said, during trial, I always have these women will call me. Hey, if I sleep with them or go out with them, they'll give us a yes vote. At first, I'm thinking he's bullshitting me, right? I look at him and I said,
insanity.
Yeah. He's
at this point, aren't you thinking, hey, I need to find another lawyer?
Yeah. And I said, are you shitting me, man? He goes, no, it's this way. I said, Dan, that's your legal strategy on this murder case, you know? And so more money kept changing hands. And then he called me one time, needed another 100,000 to hire expert witnesses, right?
So no, I need another lawyer.
Yeah. Well, this is, toward.
I need a public defender to be this fucking incompetent.
Like 30 days into it, this. And so he needed $100,000 to hire expert witnesses, which he never hired any of them. We don't find out at trial, and I'm saying, where are they? So he pocketed another $100,000.
Right.
And so he's not doing jack shit. And then by this time, he's in a small building he told me he owned. Another attorney and his big staff. So we're coming up for trial at Thanksgiving. And he said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to schedule it and then for the day Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. And then what we're going to do is drop some Brady violations on him. And the judge will have to dismiss the cases with prejudice, the charge with prejudice.
No, they won't. Not with prejudice.
Yeah. So anyway, my family all comes down. We're starting to get ready. And then my family flies in from all over. And Dan gets it bumped to March, because he wasn't ready. He hadn't talked to anybody at this point. And then, let me back up a step here. In the middle of all this, we had a federal trial, which we won. It was a joke, this federal trial. It was.
What was it for?
Everybody who ever knew that woman sued everybody, the sheriff, the chief of police, me. All they saw was money, And they didn't get anything. And during the trial, Kenneth Hoyt was not to get political, but he was a very liberal Clinton appointee, police-hating federal judge. I was originally in Judge Sam Kent's court in Galveston. They tried to get me in. Well, he was being federal judge he was impeached for assault, whatever. So he had bumped into this character, Kenneth Hoyt. And we go on a trial and voir dire, when they're picking the jury, there was a very heavy-set African-American lady, about 600 pounds. She sat there and stared at me for like 4 or 5 days in voir dire. And then at the end, the judge asked, does anybody have any questions? And she said, she goes, I got some question. She goes, everybody kind of looks at her. She goes, look smart at me. She goes, when are we going to talk about the death penalty? She doesn't want to have me executed, And the judge said, well, this is a civil. There's nobody being executed here.
You fucking idiot.
Yeah. But leaning back up once again, at my second trial, my criminal trial during voir dire, they always ask, you've been through the system. They always ask, does anybody know the defendant, any of the attorneys? No.
Anybody, or any members of your family, member of law enforcement, all the different,
Well, everybody's, no. Well, I had one female, all male, one female at that jury. And we found out after the trial, not only did she lie about not being a lawyer, she was a lawyer. She worked for my prosecutor at the DA's office for a time. So she forgot to tell us that. Her name is Julie. But she's being addressed about that. But she forgot to tell us that she actually used to work as a DA with a prosecutor that was going after me. But at the federal trial, we went through about 5 days of it. And there was one of the lawyers against everybody who was after us. The chief of police, the sheriff, the county attorney himself was representing us. This guy's name was Brannon, this lawyer. And he's standing behind me. He had like a polka dotted, he looked like something off a clown show, polka dotted towel, short, fat, heavy set old white guy, plaid suit. He's standing behind me. He's standing behind me hollering, "This boy is a murderer, a murderer." Standing right behind me screaming this during the trial, right? I didn't convict of anything, you know? And then the county attorney himself was representing me. And he's standing up saying, "Your Honor, you know," and we weren't allowed to put one witness on the stand. You have a constitutional right to all this, right? Mm-hmm. We can put a witness on the stand. None of my lawyers, the sheriff's lawyers, the police department's lawyers, the county attorneys, they weren't allowed to confront any witnesses, you know? And so finally the county attorney stood up and threw his pencil in there and he goes, "Hey, Your Honor, we have a right to do this, you know?" He said, "You have a right to shut the hell up." He goes, "You don't, the judge did." He said, "You don't have to wait around my court, you can leave, you know?" But during the federal trial was ridiculous. I went to it like 5 days. And I asked my lawyer, "Do I need a beer?" And he goes, "No, you're not going to testify. You don't really have to be there." So I didn't even go. But an odd thing happened during the middle of the trial. One day we were eating lunch at the cafeteria of the federal courthouse, and one of the lawyers was there standing next to me from the other side. And he kind of looks at me and said, "How's it going, man?" I said, "All right." And I said, "What do you think about this?" He goes, "We can't be talking." And between him, he goes, "This is bullshit." Because we know what's going on. And we recently talked to this guy. But also there was, I went to lunch. It was that Captain Harper, sheriff's captain, who was banging the suspect. You know, he'd been married 20-something years. But we all go to lunch. Sheriff, Lieutenant Coons, all of us go to lunch. We're coming back. We're eating lunch, and C.J. Harper, Captain Harper, went to go wash his hands or whatever. I said, "That's a sorry motherfucker right there." And the sheriff, everybody looks at me like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Y'all know that he was banging her, right?" And they'll look at me. County attorney, I said, "None of y'all have known this." It was well known out in the district. And all just like looking. And Lieutenant Coons, my lieutenant, was there. Good guy, man. So the county attorney said, "Don't say anything when he comes back," right? So currently when he came back, he knew something was up. Somebody didn't say anything. So we walk all the way back to the federal courthouse. And Lieutenant Coons goes, "I'm going to go confront him." Because Captain Harper goes, "I'm going to get a pack of smokes out of my car." And so Lieutenant Coons followed Captain Harper, and Coons comes back pissed. So what did he say? He said, "Yes, so what?" But he comes strolling back up, you know. I said, "Man, how could you do this?" Because this is after being convicted criminally the first time. I said, "Man, how could you do this to my family and me?" He goes, "What?" I said, "You committed aggravated perjury at the grand jury. You clearly did during my trial. And now you just lied on federal stand." He goes, "I don't give a fuck. I've been here 25 years. What are they going to do? Fire me? They're going to do shit." And they didn't do anything to him. But
so were you found guilty on the
no, the civil, no, originally the civil, but then immediately got to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They threw it right out.
So what happened in the second trial, the criminal trial?
Well, we wound up going back to trial again with Cogdell, and Cogdell never looked at one document at all. And he spoke to one witness, and that was Michael Schaefer, the confidential informant. He spoke to him for less than an hour at a restaurant, busy restaurant, on the Sunday night prior to my trial beginning Monday morning. That's the only witness he talked to. And
did he find out why he was cooperating?
The informant?
Yeah.
He's bouncing back and forth. He's cooperated with us now. But 11 days prior to trial, our kids were at school, and I started talking to my wife, Michelle. I said, "Man, Cogdell's," and she hated Cogdell from the word go. She kept saying, "You need to get rid of him," you know? And now we're too close to trial. We had a trial date, 11 days away. And Michelle are talking, and phone rings. It's Jeff Becker, Cogdell's private investigator. And he said, "Hey, man, can you meet me for lunch?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I need to talk to you." I knew by his tone. I hung up, looked at my wife. I said, "Man, I'm fucked. I'm going to prison." She goes, "What'd he say?" I said, "It's Jeff. He wants to meet me." So I drive all the way down to Cadillac Bar and Grill. It's like this yuppie place, I went in there, and, we had a few Lone Stars and cheeseburger, and Jeff looks at me and goes, "You're fucked. You're going to prison." I said, I just said those very words to Michelle. What in the hell is Cogdell doing? He's not doing a fucking thing. He said, Jeff Becker told the investigator said that Cogdell owed him $136,000 in investigative fees for my cases and others. He doesn't have the money to pay it. And he said that, that office building, he's just borrowing that from another attorney. That's not even his office. He goes, all the secretaries are about to quit. He goes, we haven't been paid in months. They're about to cut the phones off. And I told you, I talked to there's me and three other very high profile cases that he had. I knew that the four of us talking that we had given Dan minimally $11 million in legal fees in 11 months. And I asked Becker, I said, what the fuck did he do with $11 million he's made? Blew it on hookers and snorted up his nose and blew it on hookers. I said, that's a lot of dope and poontang, man. You know? So obviously I'm pissed. So I storm, jump in my truck. I go down, slam the doors open on Cogdon, lean on the ground. I said, man, if I go to prison, I'm coming for you, man. You know? So I go to trial 11 days later. And Dan was so high on cocaine, he literally did not know who the witnesses were on the stand. He gives me a stack of Post-it notes and 2 legal pads. He goes, write down, before trial, write down whatever's going on. I'm literally writing on the legal pad, and there's multiple witnesses to this. Everybody knows it happened. I'm writing on the legal pad who the witnesses are on the stand and the questions to ask them, Like the second or third day into this, he said, hey, quit doing that, man. You're making me look like making me look bad. I said, my life's on the line. You don't know a fucking thing, man. And then Malloy and Morong, the 2 deputies, are courageously have stood by me up to this very day. Because none of our stories have wavered, not one iota. But he told me don't talk to any witnesses, right? And so Morong and Malloy, of course, I'll go over and shook their hand. I hadn't seen them in all these years. I said, hey, Cogdale walks up. And I said to Morong and Malloy, so you guys ready to testify? And they said, we don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? So we didn't even talk to your lawyer. I said, Dan, you never even talked to these guys? No, I've got their statements. That's 10 years ago, man. So I shut them around the hallway and we had words. Cogdale and I did. And then trial was it was a circus, man. It was bullshit, man. Contradicting everything. But anyway, it comes down to it at the trial. You took a break after both sides put on their entire cases. You have closing arguments. Well, we broke like an hour for closing arguments. Well, Cogdale tells me and Jeff Becker, his investigator, hey, I need y'all to go with me because he had a townhouse near downtown. So I'm the front passenger side of the truck. Becker's in the back seat and Dan's driving. We go to Dan's townhouse and we start to get out. Dan goes, no, just wait here. So Dan goes into his townhouse. And I said, Becker goes, you know what he's doing, don't you? I said, he's fucking blowing, man. He goes, that's exactly what he's doing. He comes back. He literally had cocaine on his nose. I said, wipe that shit off your nose, Dan. So we go back to the courthouse to do closing arguments. And he's pouring sweat, screaming and hollering, running around, pointing at different stuff, It was a joke, absolute freaking joke, man. And then the DA gets up there on their closing arguments. We don't need to all the screaming and hollering. We all know what went on. Blah, blah, blah. So I got found guilty. And this was a Friday. And that weekend was my birthday, my anniversary, and Easter. All fell in the same weekend. So that sucked. I sat in jail for that weekend. And then they put me on to call the cop to contain.
Did you have a jury trial at this one?
Both jury trials. All 3 trials, including the federal trial. But, so I get found guilty. I go back Monday. They bring me in, and we're standing there, and the jury goes and deliberates, right? So it was like 4 hours, I think, something like that. And they came in, I'd defendant rise and blah, blah, blah. And so I was there, and they came in, and they gave me 20 years. And they changed the law, so even if I got 15, I was not going to stay on. And so I heard my mother wail, dad sobbing, everybody in the family, and I was like, and I told my brother's a police officer, And then, one time, I think that day the day before we were walking back from lunch, and we walked by a parking lot where my truck was parked. And I knew I was going down at that point. I kind of stopped, hesitated, looked at my truck. My brother grabbed me and said, don't even think about it. I was already thinking about hauling ass. I was done for anyway, trying to find me in Belize or wherever. And then, I was hugging my family goodbye, they let me do that because I knew all the deputies and the bailiffs and whatnot. And so I hugged him. My brother has Glock, iPad. He goes, don't even think about it. Not that I was thinking about it, but he said, don't even think about it, man. But needless to say, I was pissed. And then they didn't want me in Harris County jail because I trained most of those people. My cousin was a deputy there. I think I spent like 1 day in jail. I think like then the next day, early, like 1 o'clock in the morning, came and got me. And they took me to prison. And it was, they moved me just ahead. I went to 20 different units over there. And Texas has like 110, 111 units. But they took me to bird units where they do processing. And I get there, it's dark. And that's the only time in 19 years, 4 months, and 4 days of prison they put me in any kind of safety situation. They put me in what's called a safekeeping wing. And this prison was built like in 1868 or something like that. Old red bricks, the big cranking bars, doors, whatever. And I'm like, this is fucked up, right? And this is in March. In Texas, there's no air conditioner. I don't think they have air conditioner in Florida prisons either. I've run into some guys who did time.
It's horrible.
Yeah. But they put me on a third tier, right? So I'm walking down this tier, the safekeeping tier. I'm clearly the only Caucasian guy, clearly the only heterosexual, and most probably clearly the only guy with an IQ over 70 or had any sliver of sanity, in his head. Back then they had boxers with the flies in them on the front. And they're all, hands and knees, spread, butt cheeks. Hey, man, who's so pussy? Yeah, myself. I'm thinking, are you fucking kidding me? I thought that's what I was going for 20 years. I don't know jack shit about the penal system at that point. And I'm like, fuck this, man. So they put me in there all night. They're screaming all night long, which is pretty much for the next 20 years what I dealt with. I was in there, and about 2 days later, they came and said, you got a bench warrant, which means I had to go out to Harris County. So then I thought, what are they going to charge me some other nonsense, right? I know what's going on. But these two deputies came back up to Huntsville, which is about an hour from Houston, where TDC's headquarters is. And these deputies, they shackle me, and I recognize them, right? But they're like, don't say anything, right? I'm all shackled. They take me out and put me in the sheriff's van and go around the corner. They unshackle me, whatever. Took me to do a drive-through at Whataburger and whatnot, which is the last Whataburger I had for almost 20 years. And it was the first place I went when I got out. But I go down to Houston for like 1 or 2 days. I go back. And when you're going through, as you went through, I'm sure, not orientation, what do you call it? When they're doing classifications as far as your crime and where they're going to house you and whatever your status, whatever. Yeah. Classification stuff.
They don't do that in the feds, but where you said they send you to a processing station. You're there for a few months. Sometimes some places it's a week, sometimes it's months, and then you go to your prison.
Correct. Yeah. Intake, I think they call it.
Yeah.
But I went in and I was going through this and that. And they have sociology 1 and 2. And sociology 1 was about your family. Well, I'm not telling them shit about my family. Because I guess they do that in case you run away or something. I'm not telling them shit about any of my family. And then this one I'd been up for 5 days. And the next day they called me down. I'll never forget this, man. She was this lady, African-American lady, maybe 45. I walk in and she had 4 big 3-ring binders and 2 or 3 smaller ones spread across her desk. And I walk in and she goes, "You're McGowan?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She goes, "Have a seat." I said, I'd rather stand. And I'm pissed at this point, right? Obviously. And she goes, "I've been doing this for 14 years. She goes, "This is the biggest crock of shit I've seen." Yeah. And she goes, "You had a valid judge, a felony warrant signed by a judge. You said your officers with you didn't even know that witnessed it. The suspect had a gun she illegally had. Her own son testified she's going to kill her husband with it." She goes, "How in the hell did you wind up in prison over this?" I said, "Shitty lawyers and, fighting a corrupt system." She was telling me you got somebody trying to get you out of here. And of course, you don't hear from your family. They can't, there's no contact where you're
for weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the next day, some idiot guards come and get me. And they say, "You got a legal visit." So I figured it's that dickhead Cogdell, right? So I go down there and there's Jack B. Zimmerman, Marine Corps colonel and very famous attorney. And actually Dan Cogdell, several of my lawyers, Dan Cogdell, Dick DeGuerin, Jack Zimmerman, were all involved in the Waco. The Branch Davidians are the ones who went into the compound. Mm-hmm. I think 4 of my lawyers were the ones that went in that I wound up having years later. And as a matter of fact, reflecting on that was Ed Porter, the prosecutor, and Steve Clapper and John Denham, guys set me up. They went to my parents' ranch in the middle of all this stuff before I got sent to prison. After the Branch Davidian shootout, they went trespassed while we weren't there or whatnot. Made a video. They called my lawyers laughing about it. Told my lawyers they couldn't wait for the shootout at the McGowan compound, referring to the Branch Davidians. Those guys, they were gunning for me, man. And then, but anyway, this lady, at the intake, and she said that, and I told Zimmerman what she told me. So they tried for like a year to get those documents. TDC, well, they're in a warehouse here. They're archived. We never got hold of what she was reading. When I asked her, the lady, I said, "What are those?" She goes, "These are your files, legal files." From where? And she was from the DA's office. I said, "That sure as hell's not what they're testified in court to, But anyway, so Jack Zimmerman comes to see me, and he said, "Hey, your dad and your wife hired me." That's all right. And I knew who he was. I never spoke with him before. He's a very famous lawyer. And he goes, "I have 2 questions for you." He goes, "Why do you hire me at first? Definitely like an asshole." Saying, I said, "Well, I should have, And the second question is, what happened? I talked to that point like 2 hours. And then he looked at me and said, "Let me tell you something, man." He said, "If I sat here with you and you told me this about any other lawyer beside Dan Cogdell," he said, "I'd get up and walk away." He goes, "I don't want to help you and something not work out. And you say crazy shit like this." We don't cuss, crazy stuff like that. He said, "I've known Dan for 20 years. I believe every word you're saying. I'm going to take your case." All right. So it was Jack and his daughter, who's Marine Corps Colonel too, Terry Zimmerman, brilliant lawyer. And then Jim Lindeman was the third part on there. And they filed my direct appeal. A couple years later, we lost. Then they filed a PDR, the Court of Criminal Appeals. They weren't hearing it. And then my next step was a writ of habeas corpus. So I wound up hiring Randy Schaefer. And he and I didn't get along. He was just an out there police-hating dude, man. But he despised Dan Cogdell, a lawyer. And he took my case. He didn't give a shit about me. But he was trying to get me out of prison. Look, Dan looked bad, you know. And so, man, I battled that guy for 3 years or what to get, you know, the writ. We had 6 points of error. I signed off on it after 3 years of battling with him. He takes off 3. The only 3 he had left was ineffective assistance of counsel, which means Dan didn't do shit. Got me locked up. Right? Mm-hmm. And so we wound up losing our state writ of habeas corpus. And then, and actually, we have possession now. So when Dan watches this, he's going to know. Cogdell wrote a personal letter to Randy Schaefer, my writ lawyer. And we call it the Cogdell Confession. And I stumbled across it, which we'll get in these documents shortly. But everybody said, I fucked up, man. I never talked to any witnesses. I didn't know what to object to a trial. I don't know why I didn't object to this. This is a personal letter where somehow we got a hold of it, you know? And then during my appeals, Cogdell, which I never heard from him in those time, he did write 2 formal statements by order of the court saying that under 2 situations, he said that what the actions I took were inadvertent and non-strategic, which are legalese for
I fucked up.
I fucked up, you know. They weren't here. They didn't care. And then the judge I had at my second trial, she despised me, made a bunch of inappropriate comments in front of the jury out in the street and whatnot. But anyway, that's where that leads to. And then after my trial, then back up again, after my second, when I got found guilty, I got to 20, Cogdell, because Cogdell hadn't practiced law in a year. We don't find out till later because he was that dancer chick he got knocked up and had the kid with and all that. But Alan Goodling was his co-counsel at the time. And Dan called a big press conference. Well, Dan burns out of the court's chambers. It leaves my family to walk out there to the media all hysterical because he lost. He thought this was his big win to get him up and going again. Well, Alan Goodling actually went and talked to the jurors. He said, how did you find him guilty? And they said, well, he didn't testify. I kept telling Cogdell, you need to put me on the stand. If it comes to a case where somebody's dead or a sex allegation, the defendant needs to tell their story.
Right.
You know, because if you don't tell your story, somebody else is going to tell that story. It's not going to be in your favor. And you're going to get fucked. You know, you need to talk. But he kept saying, well, you're too arrogant and all this about this stuff. You know, I said, it doesn't matter. I need to get there and tell what happened. So Alan went there and talked to the jury. And he said, how did you find him guilty? It was a 2-week trial. And the jurors told Alan Goodling, my Dan's partner, that they said, well, McGowan didn't testify. We don't know what happened for the first week. We thought he and 2 buddies went and broke in the house on a robbery and killed the housewife. That's what they thought for a whole week, you know? And then he said, well, why did you give him 20 years? They said, no, we only gave him 5 years. He said, no, I was sitting there. You gave him 20 years. They said, well, the prosecutors, at this point, is Vic Weisner and Ed Porter. Ed Porter's with us the whole time. The prosecutors illegally went and talked to the jury during deliberations, told them that because of who my family is and because my being a police officer, that I have easy in prison and only had to do a quarter of my time. So the jury thought, well, if whatever happened, 5 years is good. So, you know, and then of course, Alan said, well, you know, you gave him 20. That doesn't mean he's getting out in 5. Well, it's too late then, you know? And then, and Cogdell's whole law firm broke up after this. Everybody involved in this, we're out of here, man.
Right.
Because all 4 of these high-profile cases got nailed. But then, you know, I'm locked up and come up for parole the first 5 years. Because I was eligible after, I got 20, so I was eligible at 5, right? So for 5 years, man, it was a nightmare, dude. You know, 5 years comes up, and we lost an appeal, lost another appeal, hired the writ lawyer. Following that, my 5 years comes up. Well, my dad hired Gary Cohen. He was supposed to be the best parole officer in the state. Parole lawyers, they're a joke. It's a scam. It's a big ripoff. But my dad, my brother, as a policeman, came out and told me, hey, you lost your appeal and you got a set off. You know, a 2-year set off. I said, that's it, man.
Do you even see the parole board?
Great question. It's not like people see on TV, as you know. you don't go to sit, you don't get like 5 or 7 people at parole board and you sit there, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I should have never done it. Or I didn't do this. Hell no. You never see your voters in Texas unless you have a very high profile case or you have a lot of people political wise pushing or pulling one side or the other. When I came up after 7 years, my second time up, Lynn Ruzique was a parole commissioner. She was actually probably the only one in the state was well respected. And by this time, I've been sent to another unit down on the coast. And she called me in to talk to me. And she said, look, let me tell you something. She said, I don't submit to public pressure. Or I'm bound on the political pressure. She goes, but my boss's boss do. Well, her boss and boss's boss gave me my set off 2 years previously, right? She goes, look, I let a man out of here who'd murdered a Texas Ranger. She goes, let me tell you something. She goes, they're not going to let you out of here. She said, if I let you out of here, it's going to be all over the news. If I don't let you out of here, it's going to be all over the news. I said, well, we're going to be in the news, do for the right thing. Let me out of here. She said, you're never getting paroled down here. And I'll even 7 on a 20 at this point. She goes, your family needs to figure out some other way. You're never going to get paroled out of here. That was disheartening. So anyway, I got set off after set off from parole. And finally, I had approximately a year left. It was my 10th time up for parole. I had, at this point, the Texas Rangers had been involved for 4.5 years. Investigation trying to get me out. They had 2 investigations going. One was against the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and their buffoonish OIG clowns and the parole board. Because a lot of illegal, a family got shook down for $300,000 from a parole person, family member out of state. It was like that the whole 20 years. And then Rangers are investigating the sheriff's department and the DA's office of Harris County on what happened. So I had some calls are being made, and I had a name I definitely need to mention is executive director of the Houston Police Officers Union, Ray Hunt. And it was March 13th of 2013. Already lost some family members. Both my mom and dad were in their fatal diseases. And then I sent a Hail Mary letter. I wrote one to Texas Rangers, and I said, I'm still one of you guys. I'm your brother. I'm blue. I'm in trouble. I need help. And that bounced around from like Austin, San Antonio, Waco, where it landed at Company A Rangers in Houston. And I sent one to Ray Hunt. And I'd gone to the academy with his brother in '84. I'd never met Ray, but I knew he was the executive director of the union. And I said, hey, I met your dad. I went to academy with your brother. I met your dad. He came out and hunted at family's ranch a couple of times. And the same thing. One of the good guys, brother in blue, and trouble, need help. And both them and then the ranger named Val and then Ray Hunt contacted my dad and said, what's going on? And then they did 4.5 year investigations. A whole bunch of other crazy stuff went on, but that shook people up. And then a very high-ranking politician in Texas got involved. So I come up for my final shot at parole, my 10th time up. And it was during COVID. It was during COVID, so they couldn't come in to see you. But I was the politicians were involved. They gave me moved to a private prison for my last 2 years. And the bad guys who set me up, mainly Clappert and Denholm, they kept getting more aggressive. They never thought I was going to make it through prison because there were many attempts on my life. It was just crazy. But so finally at the end, I got put in a private prison in Cleveland, just out of Houston, about an hour north of Houston. And so the major comes in and says, hey, parole wants to see you. And so he takes me into his office. Because of COVID, she couldn't actually come in. And so I sit down and I sit at his desk, and he said she'll pop up here on the computer. All right. So Major walks out. I'm sitting there, and the computer pops up, and there looks like you're my mom, And she goes, how you doing, Kent? My first name is Joseph. Mm-hmm. So she called me Kent. I kind of caught my attention, right? And this is only the 3rd time I ever got to see him in the one before, and then another one, which was part of the shakedown, and in this. And I kind of look at her funny. She goes, can you hear me? And I said, yes, ma'am. Can you hear me? And she goes, yeah. And I said, I've never talked on a computer before. She kind of laughed. She goes, I guess you haven't. I said, no. And I was ready to give her my spiel. And she said, look, Kent, she goes, I know what's happened to you in prison. I know how you wound up in prison. I cannot in good conscience let you sit here for 20 years. I only had like a year left anyway. Right? Well, she had given me a 1 year set off before, about a year and a half before. I said, well, I know you gave me a set-off last time. It takes 2. She goes, don't worry. We know what's happened now. So call's been made. And I said, what about the second vote? And the other voter was a retired sheriff, the sheriff of Lubbock County. And she said, it's been taken care of. And she said, we're going to give you an immediate release on an FI-1. I mean, out here now. She said, no restrictions, nothing. So I didn't know what to say. I was like, thank you. Trying to cry like a little girl, I didn't at all. Because in a 22-month period after I got out, my uncle I told you about passed away. Then my mom passed away. Then my aunt married that uncle. Then my dad passed away 11 months into this. And my eldest son and wife and I, when we were teenagers, passed away. And then after that, my sister-in-law, who was high school sweethearts with my brother, I adored her since I was 9 years old. All passed away. Just bam, one after another. So anyway, Tracy Long, the parole commissioner, and she said, do you know why I even denied parole for 15 years and 10 times up? I said, I have my suspicions. She goes, do the names Steve Clapper and John Denholm familiar? I said, yeah, the guys who set me up. She said, they've been calling here for 15 years, and you have contracts out to have them killed, that if we let you out, that you're going to have them murdered. I was like, it'd be understandable, but I'm not going to do it, And she said, well, she goes, we know it's bullshit. I'm going to get you out of here immediately. It still took 86 days to get me out because they kept calling, what I'm saying? So finally, they came to get me out. I didn't know who was going to pick me up, It was Ray Hunt, his brother's a police officer, another Houston police officer, picked me up. I walked out. 3 people I wanted there was my mom, my dad, and my son. But, COVID, I had not seen the sunlight in 17 months, So Ray brought me some clothes. I'm, button up shirt. Oh, this is weird. A belt. Oh, hell no, But I went out and first thing I did, I was looking around to see if my mom and dad were son there. I was thinking maybe, in my mind, maybe, because when you're locked up, you can't deal with that stuff, man. A little crazy. You just kind of file it. And I was kind of looking, maybe I just misunderstood. They weren't there, of course. But then there's Ray and 2 other HPD. Like, hey, man, they videotaped it, of course. So anyway, I get on parole. They take me where I was going. I had to go see the parole officer the next day. So it was in Houston. Man, I'm going there. What in the hell, man? Are people fighting in the parking lot? Even though my parole commissioners, my parole officer, they were totally cool. I was shocked. They said, hey, look, we got you on SISP, which meant I had to wear an ankle monitor. And I said, well, I was told by the parole lady, commissioner, she said, look, man, we got people watching us watch you. And she said, you're being flagged. Nobody thinks you're a danger or do something stupid. That God forbid something happens to you, it's going to go straight up the chain of command. So I just think I was basically on house arrest for 8.5 months. And then those guys got me a phone, which I'd never seen a phone. Oh, one of these, smartphone. They don't jack shit about it. But then when I got off, they said, don't look up your lawyers, because they didn't want me to see what was out there, tabloid trash stuff. And anyway, so I get out, and this is where we swear I'm today, man. I got out, and no lawyer's going to handle my case because they're scared of Cogno. And then I finally had a lawyer contact me. He said, hey, I know an attorney who knows about your case. I'll take your case. So I had him for like 15 months. That he gets disbarred. That had nothing to do with me. Some nonsense. And then, boom, man, I learned how to use the phone, and Facebook. And then I reached out to a very well-known screenwriter, retired FBI agent. He said, man, have you talked to Michael Tabman? Oh. Well, Tabman, he lives here in Florida. And he's a retired supervisory special agent with the FBI, 26-year veteran. As a police officer before that. So, man, he takes on my case. And he did a 3-year investigation. He's interviewed, we have on videotape, Morag Malloy, the homicide detective, Chuck Leitner, who's helped us, all these people that have come forward. In the middle of this, we get delivered to us. It was a minimum of 100,000 pages of documents that have all these, that prove not only, not nothing stupid, let alone illegal, who set me up, how they did it, everything. And after when he finished his 3-year investigation, I got called by a mutual friend and Jerry Langton, the guy who wrote this book about my case. And then it took 6 to 15 months to write the book. And I'd interviewed with Jerry 1 to 3 hours a day, Zoom, every Monday through Friday for 9 months time to get the book written. And then, but when he called me, nobody's taken my case at all. Because for 34 years, I won't hear anything. And now everybody contact, yeah. You said, this is crazy. Come on in, But not getting anybody to listen. 20 minutes after I got off the phone with Jerry Langton, the writer of the book, I get called by Steve Stanulus. He's a former Chippendales dancer, NYPD officer, very well-known podcaster, movie producer, also in New York. And he said, hey, anybody Anybody doing something on your case, And there's been a number of crazy, just tabloid trash documentaries about my case, books written. I think there's 4 or 5 of them. But none of them, because we stupidly sat silent for 34 years. Because everybody kept saying, hey, man, wait on parole, wait on your appeals, And the only people saying not to my brother and me, because all my lawyers all these years are saying,
don't talk to the media.
Yeah, all it's going to do is the DA will make more outlandish lies. They're going to believe the DA over, murder and road cop gone bad type thing, And that was the stupidest thing we did. And these guys I mentor to or what have you, man, holler, dude, call every podcast. Because this thing about not only innocent people being in prison, but police officers getting jammed up. I was the first one in the country this happened to. And there's some that are out, some are still in. One, guy that's been 30 years on something he didn't do, a fourth officer. He gets out the 24th of this month. I'm going to pick him up. He's in every day on his 30-year sentence. My doing 19 years, 4 months, and 4 days on a 20, that was unheard of. Everybody gets out percentage-wise way before that, Like Derek Holtzclaw. He's at Oklahoma City officer. He's got 235 years for some ridiculous charges. I keep up with him and his family. Brian Franklin, Fort Worth officer, 2 life sentences, something he had nothing to do with, He did 22 years and finally got his case out and then got found not guilty. Ray Spencer, there's a bunch of us out there, and we all keep in touch. And that kind of led me into this, stumbling across these I never knew what podcast was,
Right.
I missed all this Facebook stuff, dude. And then I started stumbling across these podcasts, and then we're finishing up in the book. And Jerry Langton, the writer, said, you need all these podcasters. So I started looking up what a crazy genre this is. And people are, ever since I was a kid, I have no idea who you are, but police shows and police movies are always at the top of the line.
Mm-hmm.
People are fascinated with crime and that stuff. And then this social media stuff, which I don't have a grasp on. I need to figure out TikTok, man. I'm pretty good at Facebook. Everything else is difficult. But that leads me to where I am now. And as far as an attorney, I called more than 100 attorneys in Texas. They're like, no way. We're not getting involved in this. We know what happened, but hell no. And then not 3 months ago, I shot a Hail Mary out to an attorney in Houston. And I had a history with this attorney. I thought there's no way this person's taking this case. I called and left a message, and bam, she calls me back an hour later. And she's I can't say who she is at this point for a couple more weeks to the public, but I can say this: it's going to drop a nuke right in the middle of this. And this lawyer, very well-known lawyer, the top 3 enemies in her life are Cogdell, my lawyer, and Steve Clapper and John Denholm, because of the history she's had with them and what they've done to her and whatever. She called me out blue. She said, "You've been out I've been out almost 5 years." She said, "Why have you not called me?" I was like, "Because I was scared of you." And then I went and met with her, and she said, "I'm the only one in the state of Texas pretty much going to take this case. I want to get you out of this." So we're in the process of filing because none of my lawyers have ever filed just an actual writ, actual innocence writ, saying you just didn't freaking do it. They've been fighting each other, trying to skirt over each other, and I get caught in the middle. We're doing that, and we're filing an actual pardon for the governor, an actual innocence pardon, and see how that goes. Yeah, this is Jerry Langton, and he's a best-selling author. He's written a number of books, and he's like I said, I spent 9 months with him. It took 16 months to write it. I spent 9 months every day Zooming with him, and it can be purchased through Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and he self-published it. It's Bronxkill, BRONXKILL, or jerrylangton.com, and there's other places you can get it, but that's the main ones. And then this lawyer I have, she's a top lawyer. Plead faith in her. Like I said, she's the only one that's going to help me. And she's somewhat expensive. So if anybody wants to donate to help on my legal expenses, that'd be greatly appreciated. You have Give, Send, Go. You just go to Give, Send, Go and put in just Kent McGowan, KentMcGowen. Or you can go to the first responder section and click on that. And you'll see I'm not the only one. There's a bunch of policemen in there in the same jam. And these guys, these police officers, like in Texas, we don't say cop because that's a derogatory term, but it fits. These are bad cops that set me up. They set up my partner. There's at least 6 other Harris County deputies that have been to prison or in prison as these same guys. And they've done this to civilians too. But, and one thing before you close, people ask me, man, why don't you just drop this? Just move on your life. And when Jerry Langton, when he interviewed Ray Hunt, the Houston police officer, director of the union, he was very astute when his response, which is in the book. And he said, an innocent person who's been convicted and sent to prison, Ray told Jerry, he said, they've been so deeply wronged, they never get over it, which is true. I'll get through this. I'll never get over it. It's not just me. I have grandkids now, and people ask me, I said, there's 4 reasons. Is one, there's much due justice needs to come to my family over what's happened. Number 2 is both my mom and my dad on their deathbeds made me promise them that I will fight this fight until I clear my name and the family name. Because no one in my family's even had a parking ticket, And a third reason is my kids grew up with this, the stigma and the tabloid trash, the documentaries and all that, And now my grandkids, my oldest grandson just turned 19, And then the 4th reason I'm doing this is the bad guys who've done this, they need to be held accountable. And it's coming, dude. The civil and criminal, it's coming, and they know it. None of them would even talk to Jerry. Jerry's like, none of those guys, they're not going to incriminate themselves. But they fled the state, and they tried to have me killed in prison a number of times. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that I was not murdered or worse in prison. That's what they thought. They thought I'd never make it. They never thought I'd get out. And they're doing what they can trying to shut us up. But what are you going to do? I have a right to talk. But that's the 4 reasons for doing this. And after 34 years, people like you have stepped up and said, that's a crazy, this story needs to be told. And it does. This story, if this could happen to my family and me, it could happen to you and your family. It could happen to any civilian out there. It could happen to any law enforcement officer. If you have someone crooked within the system, they're gunning for you, they're going to get you, man. Going to jail, I don't know anywhere else, but going to jail in Texas, guilt or innocence plays no part in going to prison. It's numbers. It's a megalomaniacal bunch of egotistic maniacs running the DA's office, And for the most part, it's not your patrolman on the street. That's some dude out blue collar job guy, man. It's these prosecutors that do this. It's these prosecutors that do this to people. And that's the final say. If this could happen to me, everybody out there needs to know it can happen to anybody out there, whether you're guilty or not. Right, wrong, law and order, justice, honor, none of that plays a part in going to prison. They're going to fuck you. They're going to fuck you. They're going to do it. And they'll get away with it unless you stand up and do something about it. And that's exactly what I'm doing.
Hey, you guys, I appreciate you watching. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified of videos just like this. Also, if you want to go and donate to Kent or check out his social medias and go and support him, please go in the description box. We're going to leave all the links there so you can go there. You can subscribe. You can donate. You can buy a book. Really do appreciate you watching. Thank you very much. See ya.